Hello everyone, and welcome back to Terrifying Tales. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe the episodes. Story 1. It was an unusually quiet evening when I first heard the faint scratching noise. I had just settled into my living room with a book and a cup of tea, enjoying the peaceful solitude of my small apartment. The noise was so subtle that at first, I thought it was just a figment of my imagination or perhaps a distant sound from outside. But as I tried to focus on my book, the scratching persisted, growing slightly louder and more distinct. At first, I tried to ignore it, convincing myself that it was probably a rodent or some minor issue with the building's structure. However, the noise continued intermittently throughout the night, disrupting my attempts to relax. It seemed to come from behind the walls, a rhythmic scratching that was both unsettling and persistent. The next morning, I decided to investigate. I wasn't particularly handy, but I was determined to uncover the source of the noise. Armed with a flashlight and a small toolkit, I started by inspecting the walls in the area where the scratching had been most noticeable. I knocked gently and listened for any changes in sound, trying to pinpoint the exact location. After some searching, I found a small area where the drywall seemed slightly irregular. I poked and prodded at it, and to my surprise, a section of the wall gave way, revealing a narrow cavity behind it. My heart raced with anticipation as I carefully removed the drywall, piece by piece, until I had exposed the space behind the wall. What I found was both eerie and perplexing. The cavity behind the wall was empty, except for a single, unsettling detail. Etched into the wooden framing in the inside of the drywall was a message. The words were scratched with deliberate care, as if the writer had spent a considerable amount of time crafting the message. The inscription read, "Read. Help me. They're watching. It's not safe." The words sent a shiver down my spine. I couldn't make sense of who might have written this or why it was hidden inside the wall. My first instinct was to think it was some sort of prank or a random act of vandalism, but the message felt too serious and deliberate to dismiss easily. I took photos of the message and tried to analyze the situation. The message was old, with the wood showing signs of age and wear. The drywall itself had been patched up poorly, suggesting that it had been disturbed and then hastily covered. It was clear that someone had gone to great lengths to conceal this message. The unnerving discovery prompted me to reach out to my landlord and inform them about the hidden message. They seemed genuinely concerned and assured me they would look into it. Meanwhile, I decided to dig a little deeper into the history of my apartment building. I started by contacting previous tenants and checking with the building management for any past incidents or maintenance records. Through my research, I learned that the building had a long history, and several of the apartments had experienced mysterious occurrences over the years. Some tenants had reported strange noises and unexplained disturbances, but these claims were often dismissed as figments of imagination or the quirks of an old building. My curiosity grew stronger, and I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the message than met the eye. I contacted local authorities to report the message and requested a thorough investigation of the building. The police took my report seriously and agreed to conduct a search of the premises to see if there were any other hidden messages or signs of illegal activity. While waiting for the investigation, I began to notice more oddities in my apartment. Unexplained drafts, lights flickering, and strange noises became more frequent. I tried to rationalize these occurrences as mere coincidences or the quirks of an old building, but they added to the growing sense of unease. When the authorities completed their search, they found no additional messages or evidence of tampering. They assured me that they would continue to monitor the situation but had not found any immediate threats or suspicious activity. The investigation yielded few answers, leaving me with more questions than before. As time went on, I tried to move past the unsettling discovery and focus on making my apartment feel like home. I had the wall repaired professionally, and the incident eventually faded into the background of my life. However, the experience left a lasting impact on me. I remained cautious and vigilant, always aware of the hidden spaces in my apartment and the secrets they might hold. The mystery of the message remained unsolved, a haunting reminder of the unknown that lurks behind the surface of everyday life. I never learned who wrote the message or what their situation had been, but the words continued to echo in my mind. Help me. They're watching. It's not safe. In the end, the experience taught me to be more attentive and inquisitive about the world around me. It also underscored the importance of seeking help and understanding the history of the places we inhabit. Though I never uncovered the full story behind the message, the ordeal became a part of my personal narrative, shaping my perspective on privacy, security, and the mystery and the unrestrained and lie hidden just beneath the surface. Story 2. When I decided to take a weekend getaway to a small, picturesque town, I was looking forward to a few days of relaxation and exploration. The Airbnb listing promised a charming, modern cottage nestled in a quiet neighborhood, with glowing reviews praising the hospitality and comfort. The photos showed a cozy, well-decorated space, and I felt confident that it would be a perfect retreat from the hustle and bustle of my daily life. Upon arrival, I was greeted by the host, a friendly middle-aged woman named Laura, who welcomed me with a warm smile and a brief tour of the cottage. The place was indeed as charming as advertised, with its neatly arranged furniture, stylish decor, and a lovely garden that seemed perfect for unwinding with a cup of coffee. Laura seemed genuinely hospitable, and I was quickly at ease, eager to enjoy my stay. The first night went smoothly. I slept soundly, lulled by the quiet of the neighborhood and the comfort of the well-appointed bed. The next morning, I decided to explore the town, leaving the cottage for the day. Laura had provided a detailed guide to local attractions, and I spent the day visiting quaint shops, enjoying a nice lunch at a local cafe, and taking in the sights. When I returned to the cottage that evening, I noticed that something felt slightly off. It was a small, nagging sense of unease that I couldn't quite place. The cottage seemed to be in perfect order, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. As I settled in for the night, I shrugged it off as just nerves and fatigue. The following day, I decided to do a thorough check of the cottage, partly out of curiosity and partly to ensure everything was in working order. I began by examining the living room, checking the kitchen appliances, and making sure the Wi-Fi was functioning correctly. As I moved through the rooms, I noticed a small, decorative item in the bedroom that seemed out of place: a sleek, modern clock on a shelf that I hadn't noticed before. Something about the clock caught my eye. It wasn't just a clock, it had a suspiciously tiny lens embedded in its face. My heart began to race as I realized what it could be. I carefully inspected the clock, and to my horror, discovered that it was actually a hidden camera. The realization that I had been watched while staying in the cottage was chilling. I quickly checked other potential hiding spots, finding additional cameras in various places behind picture frames, within smoke detectors, and even hidden in the air conditioning vent. Each discovery made my skin crawl. I felt a growing sense of violation as I realized the extent of the surveillance. I had been recorded in my most private moments without any knowledge or consent. The invasion of privacy was profound, and I felt an overwhelming sense of anger and betrayal. With trembling hands, I gathered evidence of the hidden cameras. I took photos of each camera and made detailed notes about their locations. I knew I had to act quickly and decisively. My first step was to contact the local authorities. I dialed the non-emergency number and explained the situation, providing them with the details and evidence I had collected. The police arrived promptly and conducted their own investigation. They examined the cameras and confirmed that they had been used to record guests without their consent. It was clear that Laura had been operating a covert surveillance system to monitor her guests, an invasion of privacy that was both illegal and deeply unethical. As the authorities took possession of the evidence, they assured me that they would follow up with the appropriate legal action. They also advised me to contact Airbnb and report the incident, which I did immediately. The Airbnb support team was responsive and took the matter seriously. They offered their assistance and promised to investigate the issue thoroughly. The experience left me feeling profoundly unsettled. The cottage, which had initially seemed like a perfect escape, had become a source of intense anxiety and violation. I had trusted Laura, a seemingly kind and welcoming host, only to discover that she had been secretly watching me. The betrayal felt personal and invasive, and it was difficult to reconcile the warm hospitality I had initially experienced with the disturbing reality of her actions. In the days that followed, I received updates from both the police and Airbnb. Laura was facing legal consequences for her actions, and Airbnb took immediate steps to ensure that similar incidents would be prevented in the future. They promised to enhance their screening processes and provide additional resources to protect guests' privacy. The ordeal left me with a heightened sense of awareness and caution. I became more vigilant about checking for hidden surveillance devices and more cautious about the people I interacted with. The experience also prompted me to advocate for stronger privacy protections for travelers, sharing my story to raise awareness about the potential risks of staying in private rentals. While the incident was deeply distressing, it served as a stark reminder of the importance of vigilance and the need to safeguard personal privacy. The charming cottage that had once represented a peaceful retreat became a symbol of the fragility of trust in an increasingly connected and sometimes intrusive world. Story 3. The day had been long and stressful, filled with endless meetings and a mountain of paperwork that seemed insurmountable. As the clock ticked towards evening, I was eager to leave the office and escape the grind. I finally packed up my things and headed out, looking forward to a quiet evening at home. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the city as I walked to my car, relieved to be done with work. I started the engine and made my way home, taking the usual route through the familiar streets. The drive was uneventful, and I was lost in thought, mentally planning out the evening's chores and relaxing activities. As I turned onto my street, I noticed a car behind me that had been tailing me for a while. It wasn't unusual to see the same cars on this route, so I didn't think much of it. Once I reached my apartment building, I parked in my designated spot and gathered my things from the passenger seat. The car that had been following me also pulled into the parking lot and parked a few spaces away. I glanced at it briefly but didn't think it was anything out of the ordinary. I assumed it was just a coincidence or perhaps someone heading to the same building. As I walked towards the entrance of my building, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The sensation grew stronger as I reached the door and fumbled with my keys. I glanced over my shoulder and saw the same car idling in the lot, its engine still running. I hurried inside, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling. Once inside my apartment, I went through my usual routine of locking the door and setting down my bags. I drew the curtains and settled into the living room, attempting to relax. I tried to focus on a book one had been reading, but the unease lingered at the back of my mind. The image of the car and its occupant, who I couldn't quite remember clearly, kept intruding on my thoughts. Deciding to take a break, I made my way to the kitchen to prepare some tea. As I waited for the kettle to boil, I wandered back into the living room and absent-mindedly glanced out the window. It was then that I saw the reflection of a figure standing outside my window. My heart raced as I realized that the person was very close to my apartment, their presence visible through the thin gap between the curtains. I squinted and saw the figure's face, which seemed eerily familiar. It was the same person who had been driving the car that followed me. The realization hit me like a cold wave. Someone had followed me home and was now watching me from outside. I quickly ducked out of view and felt a surge of panic. My mind raced through 1,000 scenarios, each more terrifying than the last. What were they doing here? What did they want? I felt a desperate need to secure my apartment and get help. I grabbed my phone and dialed the local police, my hands shaking as I explained the situation. I could barely keep my composure as I described the figure I had seen and the car that had been trailing me. The dispatcher assured me that officers would be dispatched immediately to investigate. As I waited for the police to arrive, I tried to stay calm. I avoided the windows and moved to a different room, staying out of sight. My thoughts were a chaotic mix of fear and frustration. I wondered if the person had been following me for a specific reason or if it was a random act of intimidation. Minutes felt like hours, but eventually, I heard the distant sound of sirens. Relief washed over me as I saw the flashing lights of a police car from the window. The officers arrived at my building and began to assess the situation. I met them at the entrance and led them to my apartment, recounting the events as clearly as I could. The officers conducted a thorough search of the area and checked the parking lot for any sign of the car or the individual. They also reviewed security footage from the building's cameras, hoping to gather more information about the suspect. The process took time, but the police assured me they would do everything in their power to locate the person who had followed me. After the initial investigation, the officers left with a promise to follow up with any new developments. They advised me to remain vigilant and to report any further suspicious activity immediately. As they departed, I felt a mix of relief and lingering anxiety. The immediate threat had been addressed, but the experience left me feeling exposed and vulnerable. In the days that followed, I took several steps to ensure my safety. I increased the security measures in my apartment, installing additional locks and a security camera. I also made a point to vary my routine and remain cautious when coming and going from my home. The unsettling experience had made me acutely aware of my surroundings and the importance of personal security. The police continued their investigation, and although they didn't find conclusive evidence or identify the individual who had followed me, their presence and attention had provided some comfort. I remained on high alert for any further signs of trouble, but fortunately, no additional incidents occurred. The experience served as a harsh reminder of the importance of being aware of one's surroundings and taking measures to protect oneself. It also underscored the need for vigilance and preparedness in the face of potential threats. While the immediate danger had passed, the psychological impact lingered, and I learned to navigate my daily life with a heightened sense of awareness and caution. Story 4. The first letter arrived on a cool autumn afternoon. I had just returned from work, a stack of papers and my keys in hand, when I spotted it sticking out of my mailbox. It was an unmarked envelope, its contents cryptically simple. The handwriting was scrawled in a hurried, jagged script, and the message inside was brief but menacing: "You're being watched. Keep your guard up." At first, I brushed it off as a prank. I lived in a quiet neighborhood where such things were unusual, but not entirely out of the question. I discarded the letter and went about my evening, telling myself it was nothing to worry about. But when the second letter arrived a week later, my unease began to grow. It was a similar envelope, but this time the note inside was more direct: "You can't hide forever. We know where you live." I considered contacting the police but hesitated, unsure of the seriousness of the situation. The letters were unsettling, but there was no immediate threat. I decided to keep the letters and monitor the situation, hoping that if there was any real danger, it would become more apparent. By the third letter, my anxiety had escalated. It was now a pattern. The letters arrived at irregular intervals, each one more ominous than the last. They spoke of being watched, of secrets, and of impending consequences if I didn't heed the warnings. I began to feel paranoid. Every time I left the house, I would check and double-check that everything was locked and secure. Things took a darker turn when I started noticing signs of an intrusion. One morning, I found my front door slightly ajar. It was odd because I was certain I had locked it the night before. I checked the interior. Everything seemed in place. Nothing appeared to be missing, but the sense of violation was palpable. I dismissed it as a simple mistake, perhaps an error in locking the door. Over the next few weeks, the pattern repeated. I found other signs of tampering. The back door was slightly unlatched. Windows that I remembered closing were left open just a crack. Yet every time I inspected my home, nothing was stolen. It was as if someone was entering merely to unsettle me, to toy with my sense of security. The breaking and entering incidents became more frequent and more brazen. I installed a new lock on the front door and added additional security measures, including motion sensors and cameras. But despite these precautions, the intrusions continued. The cameras would occasionally capture fleeting shadows or suspicious movements, but nothing concrete that could identify the intruder. Feeling increasingly vulnerable, I decided to take a different approach. I began documenting everything meticulously: the exact time and date of each incident, the state of the locks, and any changes I noticed in the house. I kept a detailed log of the letters and their content, hoping to find a pattern or clue that might lead to understanding the motive behind these events. One night, I was jolted awake by the sound of creaking floorboards. My heart raced as I scanned the room in the dim light. I grabbed my phone and checked the security footage. The cameras had picked up movement around the time I heard the noise, but again, the footage was inconclusive. The figure was blurred and indistinct, and no clear image of the intruder appeared. Desperate for answers, I contacted a private investigator. I explained the situation and shared all the documentation I had gathered. The investigator, a no-nonsense woman named Laura, took the case seriously and began her own investigation. She interviewed me extensively, reviewing the letters and the security footage, and then set up her own surveillance to monitor the house more closely. Weeks passed, and the intrusions continued, though Laura's presence seemed to make a difference. The frequency of the break-ins decreased, and the feeling of being watched was less intense. Laura conducted thorough interviews with my neighbors, checked local surveillance footage, and even ran background checks on anyone who seemed suspicious. But as the days turned into weeks, we were no closer to identifying the culprit. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. Laura discovered a pattern in the letters and the break-ins. The intruder seemed to be watching not just my movements, but also the patterns of the security measures I had put in place. The tampering had a methodical quality to it, suggesting that the intruder was familiar with security systems and perhaps even had a personal grudge. The pivotal moment came when Laura received a tip-off from a local informant who had seen someone acting suspiciously in the neighborhood. The description matched a pattern Laura had been tracking. With this new lead, we were able to narrow down potential suspects and eventually identify someone with a motive. The intruder turned out to be a former employee of a company where I had once worked. He had been fired under less than pleasant circumstances and had apparently held a grudge. The letters and break-ins were his way of exacting revenge and creating fear. The investigation revealed that he had been using my home as a way to get back at me, hoping to unsettle me and make me feel insecure. The police apprehended him, and the case was resolved. While the experience was deeply unsettling, it brought some closure. The intrusion stopped, and my home returned to a state of relative peace. I continued to remain vigilant, but the sense of fear had been replaced with a cautious relief. In the end, the ordeal was a stark reminder of how vulnerability can be exploited and how important it is to trust one's instincts and seek help when something doesn't feel right. The letters, the break-ins, and the constant sense of being watched had taken a toll, but they also highlighted the importance of resilience and the value of taking action in the face of intimidation. Story 5. It was a rainy Saturday afternoon when I decided to tackle the clutter in the attic. The weather had forced me indoors, and I figured it was as good a time as any to finally clear out some of the old boxes and forgotten items that had accumulated over the years. The attic had always been a bit of a mystery to me, a space filled with dusty remnants of the past, but one that I rarely ventured into. As I pulled down the attic ladder and climbed up into the dimly lit space, the musty smell of old paper and forgotten things enveloped me. I switched on a small flashlight and began sorting through a pile of boxes. Most of the items were unremarkable old holiday decorations, stacks of yellowing newspapers, and outdated electronics. I was in the middle of opening yet another box when something unusual caught my eye. At the bottom of one box, buried under a heap of old magazines and children's books, I noticed a small, wooden chest. It was ornate, with intricate carvings on its surface, and had a heavy, brass lock that seemed out of place among the otherwise mundane items. Curiosity piqued, I carefully lifted the chest from the box and examined it more closely. The lock was old and rusted, but it wasn't damaged, suggesting it had been untouched for quite some time. After a few moments of trying to pry the lock open with a makeshift tool, I decided to look for a key. I rummaged through the nearby boxes, hoping to find something that might fit. To my surprise, I actually found a small brass key buried in a drawer filled with old keys and trinkets. With a mix of excitement and trepidation, I tried the key on the chest. It turned with a satisfying click. Inside the chest, I found a collection of photographs, neatly stacked and secured in an old photo album. The first few pages were filled with what seemed to be normal. Everyday pictures, family gatherings, holiday celebrations, and various snapshots of life. But as I turned the pages, the photos grew increasingly unsettling. The images began to focus on my family and me in ways that felt invasive and disturbing. There were photographs of us in our home, captured in moments of vulnerability. I saw pictures of us through windows, in our backyard, and even in the kitchen. It was as though someone had been watching us for an extended period, documenting our daily lives from hidden vantage points. Each photograph was meticulously labeled with dates and times, adding a chilling layer of precision to the already unsettling collection. I felt a shiver run down my spine. The realization that someone had been intruding into our private moments, documenting them without our knowledge, was horrifying. I tried to stay calm and collected, but my hands trembled as I continued to flip through the album. Some of the photos were taken from angles that suggested hidden cameras, while others seemed to have been taken from places that were well beyond the usual view of any ordinary observer. The last few pages of the album were the most disturbing. They contained close-up shots of our faces, photos taken in moments of fear or distress. There were images of us reacting to loud noises, unexpected visitors, and other stressful situations. It was clear that someone had been monitoring not just our everyday activities, but also our more private and vulnerable moments. I closed the chest and took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. The attic suddenly felt much colder, and the shadows seemed to loom larger. I knew I had to do something, but my mind raced with questions. Who could have done this? Why did they have such a detailed record of our lives? How long had this been going on? Without wasting any more time, I brought the chest and its contents downstairs and called the authorities. I explained the situation to the police, providing them with the photographs and detailing the disturbing nature of the discovery. They arrived promptly and took the evidence for further investigation. The officers were professional and sympathetic, but I could tell they were as perplexed and concerned as I was. While waiting for the investigation to progress, I took additional precautions to ensure the safety of my family. I contacted a security expert to assess our home for any potential surveillance equipment that might still be hidden. The expert conducted a thorough sweep of the property, checking for any devices or signs of tampering. Thankfully, no additional equipment was found, but the sense of invasion left me feeling uneasy. As days turned into weeks, the investigation continued, but there were no immediate answers. The police were working on tracking down leads and trying to piece together how the photographs had ended up in the chest, but progress was slow. Meanwhile, I made sure to stay vigilant, improving our home security and remaining cautious of any strange occurrences. The experience left a deep scar on my sense of security. The attic, once a forgotten storage space, had become a constant reminder of the breach into our private lives. The photographs had exposed a hidden and unsettling reality, one that I could not easily forget or ignore. In the end, the discovery had forced me to confront the vulnerability of our personal space and the lengths to which someone might go to invade it. The investigation remained open, and though I hoped for answers, the emotional impact of the breach was something that would linger long after the physical evidence had been examined. Story 6. Traveling alone had always been a source of solace for me, a chance to escape the daily grind and immerse myself in new experiences. This particular trip was meant to be a refreshing break from my busy life. I had planned a week-long journey to a quaint coastal town known for its scenic beauty and relaxed atmosphere. Everything was going as planned until an unsettling event turned my vacation into something far more ominous. It was a crisp afternoon when I decided to explore the town's charming downtown area. The streets were lined with boutique shops, cozy cafes, and art galleries. I spent the day wandering through galleries, sampling local cuisine, and enjoying the fresh sea air. As the sun began to set, casting a golden hue over the town, I felt a deep sense of contentment and relaxation. Returning to my rental apartment, I was in high spirits. I had just settled in for a quiet evening when my phone rang. The caller ID displayed an unknown number. I hesitated for a moment, but curiosity got the better of me. I answered the call, expecting perhaps a wrong number or a telemarketing pitch. "Hello," I said, my voice tinged with curiosity. There was a brief pause before a series of recorded voices began playing through the speaker. The first recording was a snippet of a conversation I had had earlier in the day with the barista at a local cafe. It was a casual exchange about my choice of coffee and a brief chat about the weather. I was taken aback, unable to process what I was hearing. Before I could react, the next recording started. It was a snippet from a conversation I had with a shopkeeper while browsing through a boutique. The shopkeeper had recommended a particular item, and we had discussed local attractions. The recordings continued, each one capturing moments from my day with unnerving precision. My heart raced as I listened to the recordings. How was this possible? The conversations were intimate and mundane, yet they were now being replayed to me as if they were a product for someone's entertainment, or worse, their malicious intent. I ended the call abruptly, my mind swirling with confusion and fear. I stared at my phone in disbelief, replaying the recordings in my head. It was clear that someone had been listening to my conversations and had the means to capture and store them. The realization that my privacy had been so egregiously violated was overwhelming. I felt exposed and vulnerable, questioning how someone had managed to intercept and record my personal conversations. My immediate instinct was to contact the authorities, but I was far from home, in an unfamiliar town with no idea where to start. I decided to report the incident to the local police, hoping they would have the resources to assist me. I found the nearest police station and walked in, trying to stay composed despite the gnawing anxiety. The officer on duty listened to my story with a look of concern. I explained the details of the phone call and the content of the recordings. The officer assured me that they would investigate the matter, but warned me that tracking down the source of such recordings could be complex. I provided them with all the information I had, including the unknown number from which the call had originated. As I left the station, I felt a mix of relief and apprehension. I had taken the first step toward addressing the situation, but the uncertainty of whether the authorities could resolve it left me feeling uneasy. I returned to my rental apartment, determined to remain vigilant and take precautions to protect my privacy. Over the next few days, I noticed a heightened sense of paranoia. I was cautious about whom I spoke to and avoided discussing personal details openly. I became more aware of my surroundings and took measures to secure my devices. Despite my efforts, the sense of intrusion lingered, casting a shadow over what was supposed to be a relaxing getaway. Then, a few days later, I received another call from the same unknown number. This time, the recordings were more recent, capturing conversations I had had in the past day. It became evident that the recordings were not just from my earlier interactions, but were being updated in real time. The realization that someone was actively monitoring my conversations was both horrifying and infuriating. I immediately contacted the police again and updated them on the new developments. The authorities escalated the investigation, involving cybercrime experts to trace the source of the recordings and the unknown number. They assured me they were doing everything they could, but advised me to continue being cautious and to avoid discussing sensitive information over the phone. The following days were tense and filled with uncertainty. I did my best to maintain a sense of normalcy while remaining on high alert. I avoided using my phone for any personal conversations and communicated only through secure channels when necessary. Despite these precautions, the sense of violation remained, and the enjoyment of my trip was overshadowed by the ongoing investigation. Eventually, after several weeks, the authorities made some progress in their investigation. They traced the unknown number to a local business that had been using a call forwarding service. The business owner was cooperative, but the investigation revealed that the recordings were not being accessed or used by them. Instead, they were being routed through an intermediary. The case remained open, and the authorities continued their efforts to track down the true source of the recordings. While the investigation was ongoing, I had to return home, carrying with me the unsettling experience and a new awareness of how vulnerable our privacy can be. The incident had left me shaken, but it also reinforced the importance of safeguarding personal information and being vigilant about privacy. As I settled back into my routine, I remained cautious and took steps to protect my digital footprint. The experience had been a stark reminder of the need for security and the potential consequences of having our private lives exposed. The coastal town I had once viewed as a haven had become a backdrop to a deeply unsettling experience. While I hoped for resolution and justice, the memory of the intrusive phone calls and the invasion of privacy lingered, a stark reminder of the fragility of our personal boundaries in an increasingly connected world. Story 7. It was a quiet Saturday morning when I first noticed something unusual about my house. I had spent most of the previous week traveling for work and had just returned home. The house was exactly as I had left it, or so I thought. It was during my routine of unpacking and settling back in that I noticed a faint, musty odor lingering in the hallway. I dismissed it as old dust and settled into my usual weekend routine. A few days later, while sorting through some old boxes in the attic, I found myself overwhelmed by the need to declutter. It was a task I had been putting off for months. The attic was a maze of forgotten items, old furniture, stacks of books, and boxes filled with seasonal decorations. The space was dimly lit by a single bulb, and the air was thick with dust. I started by clearing out some of the more accessible boxes, setting aside anything that looked like it could be donated or discarded. As I moved deeper into the attic, I discovered a small, obscure corner that I had overlooked before. Pushing aside a dusty sheet, I found an old trunk that had been tucked away. The trunk was unremarkable at first glance, just a battered wooden box with metal clasps. I pulled it out and opened it, expecting to find old clothes or family heirlooms. Instead, I was met with an assortment of odd items. Inside the trunk were a few food wrappers, a couple of used paper plates, and some empty water bottles. Alongside these were personal belongings, things I didn't recognize but felt oddly intimate, like a pair of reading glasses and a worn-out sweater. My heart began to race as I sorted through the contents, trying to make sense of the items. The food wrappers looked as though they had been used recently, which was strange because the trunk had been hidden in a corner I rarely accessed. I started to piece things together, feeling a growing sense of dread. The more I looked, the more I realized that someone had been using this space. My first thought was that it could be a simple case of someone taking refuge in my home, perhaps a squatter. But the idea of someone living in my attic, right under my nose, was both chilling and disorienting. I searched the attic more thoroughly, moving items around to check for any other signs of recent activity. Behind some old, forgotten furniture, I found more food wrappers and several other personal items: a toothbrush, a half-empty tube of toothpaste, and a small tattered notebook. The notebook was particularly unsettling. It contained handwritten notes and sketches, some of which included detailed observations of my daily routines. It was as if someone had been meticulously documenting my life. The gravity of the situation hit me hard. I felt a surge of panic and violated privacy. The attic had always seemed like a safe, unused space, a place where old memories were stored. The realization that someone had been living there, watching me from above, turned that safe space into a sinister reminder of the invasion. I immediately contacted the police, explaining the situation and providing them with the evidence I had found. An officer arrived within the hour and examined the exact, taking detailed notes and photographs. The officer's presence provided a slight sense of relief, but the feeling of intrusion remained overwhelming. The investigation revealed that there had been no signs of forced entry into the house. It seemed that the intruder had somehow gained access through a small, barely noticeable hatch in the ceiling of a closet in the master bedroom. This hatch was rarely used and had become a hidden entry point for someone intent on living undetected. Over the next few days, the police conducted a thorough search of the premises and interviewed neighbors to gather any additional information. They also checked for any recent reports of missing persons or suspicious activity in the area. Despite their efforts, the investigation yielded few leads. It was as if the intruder had vanished without a trace. As the weeks went by, I took measures to secure my home. I installed additional locks, reinforced the attic hatch, and upgraded the security system with cameras. The sense of safety was slowly restored, but the psychological impact lingered. The idea that someone had been living in my attic, observing my life without my knowledge, left an indelible mark on my sense of security. I found myself hyper-aware of every sound and movement in the house. Even simple tasks like climbing the attic stairs became a reminder of the intrusion. I had always prided myself on being vigilant, but the experience made me question how well I truly knew my own home. I also found myself more cautious about my privacy. I became meticulous about securing personal information and ensuring that any potential vulnerabilities in my home were addressed. It was a sobering lesson in the importance of maintaining vigilance and the reality of hidden dangers that could lurk in the most unexpected places. Eventually, life began to return to a semblance of normalcy. The attic was thoroughly cleaned and repurposed as a storage space for seasonal decorations and old furniture. The memory of the intrusion remained a dark shadow, a reminder of how easily one's sense of security can be shattered. In the end, while the mystery of the attic intruder remained unresolved, the experience left me with a deeper understanding of personal security and the importance of safeguarding one's home. The attic, once a forgotten corner of my life, had become a symbol of the boundaries we must protect to ensure our peace of mind. Story 8. It was a typical Saturday morning, and I was enjoying a rare day off. The sun was shining, and I had planned a relaxing day at home, catching up on some reading and perhaps tackling a few household chores. I was in the middle of making coffee when I heard the doorbell ring, expecting it to be a delivery or a neighbor. I was surprised to see my coworker, Dan, standing on the other side of the door when I opened it. Dan, who worked in the same department as I did, was a pleasant enough person but not someone I'd consider a close friend. He had always been friendly and somewhat chatty at work, but we rarely socialized outside the office. Seeing him on my doorstep was unexpected, and I couldn't hide my surprise. "Hey there," Dan said cheerfully. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything. I was just in the neighborhood and thought I'd drop by." I hesitated for a moment. It was an unusual coincidence that he happened to be in the area on a Saturday morning, especially since he knew where I lived. I forced a smile and invited him in, thinking it would be polite to at least offer him a cup of coffee. As Dan stepped inside, I noticed how his eyes seemed to dart around the room, taking in the details of my living space. We made small talk as I prepared the coffee, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The conversation began innocently enough. Dan asked about my plans for the day and commented on the new bookshelf I had recently installed. I made polite responses, but his casual knowledge about my home struck me as odd. When I mentioned that I was planning to do some gardening, Dan seemed particularly interested. He asked specific questions about the types of plants I had and offered unsolicited advice about soil quality and pest control. His knowledge about my gardening hobbies was accurate, but his familiarity with the details made me uneasy. After a while, Dan started to talk about work, and I began to relax a bit, thinking that perhaps he was simply trying to build a better rapport. He shared some updates about ongoing projects and office gossip, and we chatted about various topics. Yet, the feeling of discomfort lingered. There was something unsettling about his visit that I couldn't quite put my finger on. When he finally left, I was relieved but still perturbed by the encounter. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to his visit than he had let on. The fact that he had shown up unannounced and seemed to know details about my daily life was unsettling. I wondered if I had somehow mentioned these things in passing conversations at work, but nothing seemed to justify the level of detail he had demonstrated. The next week, I found myself dwelling on the visit. I began paying closer attention to my interactions at work, trying to recall if I had inadvertently shared personal information. I also took a more cautious approach in conversations, carefully considering what I revealed. My discomfort grew, and I decided to discuss the incident with a close friend, Maria, who worked in the company's HR department. Maria listened attentively as I recounted the details of Dan's visit. She shared my concern and agreed that the situation was unusual. She suggested that I document the encounter and any other instances that made me uncomfortable. It was important to have a record in case the situation escalated. Over the next few weeks, I observed Dan's behavior more closely. He continued to be friendly, but there were moments when his comments seemed oddly timed and too informed. He would mention seeing me at the gym or comment on my weekend plans, all without me ever having shared these details. The coincidence of him being in the neighborhood seemed less like chance and more like a deliberate attempt to keep tabs on me. Feeling increasingly uneasy, I decided to escalate the issue. I approached Maria again, this time with a detailed account of Dan's behavior and the peculiarities of his visit. She took my concerns seriously and agreed to investigate the matter further. The company had policies in place to address such situations, and it was essential to ensure that everyone's privacy was respected. The following week, Maria informed me that she had spoken with Dan and addressed the issue privately. Dan had been advised about the importance of respecting personal boundaries and privacy. He claimed that his visit was a genuine coincidence and that he had not intended to make me uncomfortable. While the company took the matter seriously, it was challenging to determine his true intentions without concrete evidence. In the meantime, I continued to be cautious about my interactions at work and remained vigilant about my personal space. The visit from Dan had been a wake-up call about the potential for invasions of privacy and the importance of maintaining boundaries, even in seemingly harmless situations. Months passed, and the situation with Dan seemed to have resolved itself. He continued to be a friendly coworker, but our interactions remained professional and courteous. The experience had left a lasting impression on me, and I became more conscious of my personal boundaries and the need to protect my privacy. Reflecting on the incident, I realized how easily trust could be breached and how important it was to remain vigilant about personal space and privacy. The unexpected visit from a coworker had served as a reminder of the complexities of social interactions and the need for clear boundaries, both in the workplace and beyond. Story 9. The first sign that something was off came subtly, almost imperceptibly. It was a crisp, sunny Saturday when I first noticed the oddities. I was at the local farmer's market, enjoying the leisurely atmosphere and sampling fresh produce. The market was always bustling with activity, and I was absorbed in selecting ripe tomatoes when a stranger approached me. He struck up a casual conversation, asking if I was still working at the job I had recently mentioned to a mutual friend. I was taken aback. I had only mentioned this detail in a private conversation with a close friend, not to anyone else. At first, I brushed it off as a coincidence. Maybe the stranger had overheard my conversation or simply knew a lot about the local community. But as the days went by, the unsettling pattern continued. I began receiving unsolicited messages from unfamiliar numbers, referencing personal details about my life, my favorite coffee shop, the gym I attended, even the name of my dog. Each message was disturbingly accurate, containing information that was not publicly accessible. The situation escalated quickly. I noticed that my social media accounts, which I had always kept private, started receiving odd friend requests and messages from people I didn't know. The messages often contained references to my daily routine, places I frequented, and even snippets of conversations I had with friends. It was as if someone was meticulously tracking my every move, yet their identity remained a mystery. The invasion of my privacy reached new heights when I started receiving packages at my home. These packages contained items that seemed random but were eerily tailored to my taste, books I had mentioned wanting to read, clothes in my favorite colors, and even specialty foods I had once mentioned in passing. It was as though someone had a detailed dossier on my preferences and was using it to taunt me. I reported these incidents to the authorities, but their investigations yielded little. The packages were all sent from various locations, and the messages were often routed through anonymous accounts or disposable phones. The police were sympathetic but seemed frustrated by the lack of concrete evidence. Their efforts to trace the source of the messages and packages proved fruitless. My sense of security was rapidly eroding. I began to feel paranoid, constantly checking my surroundings and avoiding places I once frequented. Every unfamiliar face in my neighborhood or at my usual haunts made me uneasy. I started altering my routines, taking different routes to work, and avoiding predictable patterns. Yet, no matter what precautions I took, the sense of being watched persisted. One evening, I returned home to find my front door slightly ajar. My heart raced as I cautiously entered, half expecting to find an intruder inside. Thankfully, the house was empty, and nothing seemed to be out of place. However, the door being ajar was enough to set off alarm bells. I had no memory of leaving it that way, and the possibility that someone had been inside was deeply unsettling. As time went on, the stalking became more sophisticated. I started noticing signs that someone was keeping tabs on my digital life as well. My email account began receiving spam messages that contained references to personal details, passwords, old addresses, and even the names of family members. It was clear that someone had gained access to my personal information and was using it to further invade my privacy. Determined to regain control, I took extensive measures to secure my digital presence. I updated all my passwords, enabled two-factor authentication, and sought the help of a cybersecurity expert to ensure there were no vulnerabilities in my accounts. I also began using encryption for sensitive communications and avoided sharing personal details online. Despite these precautions, the mystery stalker's methods evolved. I started receiving anonymous phone call silence on the other end of the line, or sometimes a faint whisper that sent chills down my spine. It was clear that my stalker was relentless and resourceful, using every means possible to monitor and intrude into my life. The psychological toll was significant. The constant fear and anxiety took a toll on my mental health. I found it difficult to trust people and became increasingly isolated, avoiding social gatherings and spending more time at home. My once comfortable sanctuary felt like a prison, and the sense of being constantly surveilled eroded my sense of security. I continued working with the authorities, providing them with every piece of evidence I could gather. I also reached out to private investigators who specialized in stalking cases, hoping that a fresh perspective might yield new leads. Despite their efforts, the identity of the stalker remained elusive. One day, while going through old records and files, I stumbled upon a peculiar pattern. I noticed that the stalker's attempts seemed to correlate with my participation in certain events or locations. The realization was both chilling and enlightening. It suggested that the stalker was not just randomly monitoring my life, but had a deeper connection or understanding of my habits and activities. Determined to protect myself, I began to make more significant changes to my lifestyle. I relocated to a new residence under a new identity, taking every precaution to ensure that my new address and personal details remained confidential. I also sought therapy to help cope with the emotional aftermath of the stalking. Although the stalking eventually subsided, the experience left an indelible mark on my life. The constant surveillance and invasion of my privacy had a profound effect on my sense of security and trust. I learned to be vigilant and cautious, understanding that there are darker aspects of human behavior that can intrude into our lives in ways we can't always predict or control. The identity of the stalker remains a mystery to this day, but the experience taught me invaluable lessons about personal safety, privacy, and resilience in the face of persistent threats. Story 10. Moving into a new apartment always felt like a fresh start. The city was vibrant and full of opportunities, and the apartment itself was a cozy one-bedroom nestled in an older building with vintage charm. I was excited to make it my own, to infuse the space with my personality and create a haven away from the hustle of daily life. The moving process was both exhausting and exhilarating. I spent the first few days unpacking boxes, arranging furniture, and settling into the rhythm of my new home. The apartment had a modest, somewhat retro appeal, with hardwood floors and classic moldings. The closet in the bedroom was spacious, its potential use for storage reassuring. One afternoon, as I was putting away clothes in the closet, I noticed something odd. Behind the hanging garments and a stack of old shoeboxes, I found a small, leather-bound diary. It was wedged in the back corner, partially hidden by a dust-covered box. Curiosity got the better of me, and I reached for it, brushing off the dust and feeling the smooth leather under my fingers. The diary was aged but well preserved, its leather cover worn but intact. It had no name or identifying marks, only a simple brass clasp that kept it securely closed. I hesitated for a moment, the sense of intruding on someone's personal space giving me pause. But my curiosity overcame my hesitation, and I gently opened the clasp and flipped through the pages. The entries began in a neat, flowing script. They were dated and detailed, chronicling a range of experiences, from mundane daily activities to deeply personal reflections. The diary belonged to the previous tenant, a woman named Eleanor, and it provided a window into her life. As I read through the entries, I discovered that Eleanor had lived in the apartment for several years. Her writings were intimate, filled with thoughts about her relationships, her hopes, and her struggles. She described her daily routines, her interactions with neighbors, and her emotional highs and lows. Each page seemed to bring Eleanor's world to life, and I couldn't help but feel a pang of empathy for her. One entry stood out, detailing a particularly difficult day. Elena wrote about a breakup with a long-term partner and the sense of betrayal she felt. Her words were raw and heartfelt, and I found myself drawn into her emotional turmoil. I felt as though I was reading a deeply personal letter meant for someone else, but now it was in my hands. Another entry described a secret project Eleanor had been working on, a novel she was writing in her spare time. She mentioned the challenges she faced with writer's block and the excitement of finally finishing a chapter. I could almost feel her sense of accomplishment as she wrote about it, her passion evident in every line. As I continued reading, I noticed a recurring theme in her diary. Eleanor seemed to be searching for something more in her life. She wrote about her dissatisfaction with her job, her yearning for adventure, and her desire to find a deeper connection with others. It was clear that she had been on a journey of self-discovery, and her diary was a testament to that journey. One particular entry caught my attention because it referenced a mysterious figure. Elena wrote about someone who had been following her, observing her actions, and causing her great distress. She didn't provide many details, but the sense of unease was palpable. She described feeling watched and paranoid, and it seemed to be a recurring source of anxiety for her. Reading these entries made me question what had happened to Eleanor. Why had she left behind such a personal record? Had she resolved the issues she had written about, or had they haunted her until she moved on? The diary gave me glimpses into a life I had never known, but it also left me with more questions than answers. I decided to look into the building's history, hoping to uncover more about Eleanor and her life here. The landlord, an elderly gentleman who had managed the building for decades, remembered Eleanor vaguely. He recalled her as a quiet, introspective tenant who had kept to herself. He mentioned that she had moved out abruptly, leaving behind a lot of her belongings, including the diary. With the diary in hand, I felt a growing sense of responsibility. I wasn't sure what to do with it. I considered reaching out to Eleanor if she was still in the area, but my attempts to find contact information were unsuccessful. It was as though she had vanished without a trace. The more I read, the more I felt like I was intruding on Eleanor's private world. I began to see reflections of her in the apartment itself, the way she had arranged her furniture, the little touches she had added. It was as if her presence still lingered in the space, her life echoing through the walls. One evening, as I was reflecting on the diary, I received a knock on my door. To my surprise, it was a young woman who introduced herself as Eleanor's sister. She had come to the building, hoping to retrieve some belongings left behind. I hesitated for a moment, then decided to give her the diary. It felt right to return it to her family, rather than keeping it myself. Eleanor's sister was grateful and moved as she read through the diary. She shared with me that Eleanor had indeed been searching for something more in her life. She had moved to another city in pursuit of new opportunities and a fresh start. Her sister was relieved to finally close the chapter of her life and to find some closure. The diary had been a window into someone else's world, and though it was initially unsettling to find it hidden in a closet, it had ultimately brought me closer to understanding Eleanor's journey. It had also given me a deeper appreciation for the lives lived in the spaces we inhabit. As I continued to make the apartment my own, I carried with me a sense of respect for the stories that came before, and a reminder of the profound connections we share, even with those we have never met. Story 11. The phone call started on an ordinary Tuesday evening, a day that had been unremarkable until the moment the phone rang. I had just settled in for the night, curling up on the couch with a good book and a cup of tea. The sound of the phone, an old-fashioned landline that I'd kept for its reliability, broke the silence. I reached for the receiver with a half-hearted curiosity, expecting it to be a telemarketer or a wrong number. The line was silent for a few seconds before a voice crackled through the receiver, soft, indistinguishable, and muffled. It was not a voice I recognized, but it carried a certain familiarity. I dismissed it as a bad connection and hung up, shrugging off the odd interruption. The next night, the phone rang again. This time, the voice on the other end was clearer but still strange. It was a high-pitched tone, almost childlike, and it sounded eerily similar to my niece's voice. The tone was too distorted to make out any actual words, but the resemblance was uncanny. I couldn't understand why someone would mimic a child's voice, and felt a chill run down my spine. I hung up, feeling unsettled. As days turned into weeks, the calls continued, each one more unnerving than the last. The voices became more specific, mimicking those of my close family and friends. I heard the familiar tone of my mother's voice, though the words were always garbled and unintelligible. My best friend's voice followed, full of laughter but distorted beyond recognition. The voices would never directly address me or provide any coherent message. They simply played back snippets of familiar sounds, leaving me on edge. I started to worry. The calls were becoming a persistent, disturbing presence in my life. I considered changing my phone number, but something about the calls, their persistence, and their specificity made me feel like there was something more to them. I wondered if someone was deliberately targeting me, using these voices to unsettle and intimidate me. I decided to take action. I started by recording the calls, hoping to analyze them for any clues. Each recording was the same familiar voices mimicking tones and inflections, but never saying anything directly. The lack of direct communication was particularly disconcerting. It felt as though the caller was toying with me, using my loved ones' voices as a way to invade my personal space. I also reached out to my family and friends, discussing the strange occurrences. They were concerned but hadn't experienced anything unusual themselves. We speculated on possible explanations, from prank calls to some form of sophisticated voice manipulation technology. None of the theories felt satisfying or reassuring. One evening, as I sat at my desk reviewing the recordings, I noticed something peculiar. There was a pattern in the timing of the calls. They often came at night, right when I was about to fall asleep. The consistency of the timing seemed deliberate, as though the caller knew my routine and was using it to their advantage. It added another layer of psychological torment, making the calls feel like a deliberate invasion of my personal space. I decided to contact the authorities, providing them with the recordings and detailing the nature of the calls. They were sympathetic but explained that without more concrete evidence, their ability to act was limited. They advised me to continue documenting the calls and to consider additional security measures. Despite their advice, I felt a growing sense of helplessness. The calls became a nightly ritual, their eerie echoes disrupting my sleep and clouding my thoughts. I found myself dreading the sound of the phone, bracing for the distorted voices that would come through the line. It was a constant, low-level anxiety that gnawed at me, preventing me from feeling truly safe in my own home. One night, as I was lying in bed, the phone rang once again. The voice on the other end was disturbingly close to my father's, though it was heavily distorted and fragmented. I could barely make out the familiar tone, but the message was unintelligible. I felt a surge of fear and frustration. This time, I decided to confront the issue head-on. I began to actively record the calls in real time, hoping that by capturing a pattern or anomaly, I might gain some insight into who was behind them. I also took additional security precautions, installing a security camera by the entrance and keeping a close watch on my surroundings. The idea of someone being able to invade my home in such a personal way was unnerving, and I wanted to be prepared for any potential escalation. After weeks of sleepless nights and mounting frustration, I finally noticed something in the recordings. One night, as the call ended, a faint click was audible, an indication that the line had been disconnected, not by me but by the caller. It was a small detail, but it suggested that the calls were coming from a nearby location. The realization added a new dimension to the mystery. Someone close by was orchestrating these disturbances. Determined to find answers, I conducted my own investigation. I began to watch for any suspicious activity in the neighborhood, paying attention to anyone who seemed out of place or who exhibited unusual behavior. I kept a log of times and dates, trying to piece together any potential leads. Eventually, my vigilance paid off. I noticed a pattern in the movements of one of the building's maintenance workers. He seemed to be around when the calls occurred and had access to the building's telephone system. When I confronted him, he initially denied everything but eventually confessed. He had been using a sophisticated device to mimic voices and disturb me, hoping to drive me away so he could access the apartment for petty thefts. The discovery was both a relief and a further invasion. The maintenance worker was apprehended, and the calls ceased, but the psychological impact lingered. The experience had been a profound reminder of how easily one's sense of security can be compromised. The distorted voices, once a haunting echo in my life, were replaced by the reality of someone's deceitful actions. In the end, the calls were not just a series of disturbing interruptions, they were a reminder of the vulnerabilities we face in our daily lives. Though the immediate threat was removed, the experience left a lasting imprint, altering my sense of safety and reminding me of the delicate balance between trust and vigilance. Story 12. The first package arrived on a chilly November morning, its presence on my doorstep barely noticeable among the usual clutter of junk mail and deliveries. It was a small, plain box wrapped in brown paper, devoid of any markings or labels. My curiosity was piqued, but I shrugged it off as a misdelivered package or perhaps a gift from a friend who had forgotten to include a note. I brought the box inside and carefully opened it. Inside was a single item, a framed photograph of myself, taken from a distance during a recent outing to the park. I was initially startled by the image, but I dismissed it as a strange coincidence or an odd joke. I checked the box again, hoping to find a note or any clue about who had sent it, but there was nothing, no name, no address, just an unsettling photo. Over the next few days, more packages began to arrive. Each one was similar in appearance, a plain, unmarked box with no indication of the sender. The items inside were increasingly disturbing. One package contained a handwritten note that mentioned details of my recent trip to a nearby city, including a specific cafe I had visited and the clothes I had worn. Another box held a collection of old, faded receipts from a store where I shopped frequently, including some that I had forgotten about. The most unsettling package arrived one evening while I was cooking dinner. This box contained a small bundle of items from my trash, an old grocery receipt, a crumpled ticket stub, and an empty envelope with my name and address on it. It was clear that someone had been going through my garbage and collecting personal information. I felt a growing sense of dread and paranoia, unsure of who could be targeting me or why. As the days went by, the frequency of the packages increased. Each one brought new, unsettling items, a copy of a personal letter I had written to a friend, a snippet of a conversation I had with a neighbor, and even a lock of hair that seemed to have been cut from a brush I had used. It became evident that someone was not only observing my life, but was also deliberately intruding into my personal space. I decided to take action. I contacted the local authorities and reported the situation. The police took the matter seriously, and an officer came to my home to collect the packages and examine the evidence. They assured me that they would investigate the issue and try to identify the source of the disturbing deliveries. In the meantime, they advised me to be vigilant and to report any further suspicious activity. While waiting for the investigation to progress, I took additional precautions to secure my home. I installed extra locks on my doors, added security cameras around the perimeter, and even set up motion-activated lights in the yard. Despite these efforts, the sense of violation lingered. The idea that someone had been monitoring my every move was deeply unsettling. The police investigation revealed that the packages had been sent from different locations, making it difficult to trace the sender. Each package was meticulously prepared, with no obvious clues about the person behind them. The authorities suggested that the sender might be using a variety of methods to avoid detection, including using fake addresses or stolen identities. As time went on, I received fewer packages, but the fear and anxiety persisted. The intrusion into my personal life had left me feeling exposed and vulnerable. I found myself second-guessing every interaction and becoming increasingly cautious about my surroundings. I was hyper-aware of every detail, constantly looking over my shoulder and scrutinizing the people around me. The situation took a turn for the worse when I began receiving anonymous phone calls in the middle of the night. The calls were brief and silent, but the unsettling nature of the calls added to my growing sense of paranoia. I reported the calls to the authorities, and they traced the calls to a payphone several miles away. The investigation continued, but the perpetrator remained elusive. Eventually, the packages stopped arriving, and the phone calls ceased. The police were unable to identify the person responsible or determine their motives. The investigation remained open, but the lack of tangible leads made it difficult to make progress. The experience left me deeply shaken. The once familiar comforts of my home had become a source of fear and anxiety. The sense of invasion into my personal life was profound, and I struggled to regain a sense of normalcy. I found solace in discussing the ordeal with friends and family, who offered support and reassurance. The incident also made me more aware of the importance of personal privacy and security. I became more vigilant about safeguarding my personal information and took steps to ensure that my home was secure. I also sought therapy to help process the trauma and anxiety caused by the experience. While the identity of the sender remained a mystery, the ordeal served as a stark reminder of the vulnerabilities we face in an increasingly connected world. The packages, once symbols of intrusion, became a catalyst for change, prompting me to take greater control of my privacy and security. The experience, though deeply unsettling, ultimately strengthened my resolve to protect myself and my personal space from unwanted intrusions. Story 13. It began subtly, a sense of something being off. I'd noticed small, almost imperceptible changes in my financial accounts, a few discrepancies and unrecognized charges. At first, I dismissed them as minor errors or oversights, chalking them up to my occasional lapses in attention. But then, The unease turned into outright fear. It started with a phone call. I was at home on a lazy Saturday afternoon when my phone rang. An automated voice on the other end informed me that my credit card had been flagged for suspicious activity. I panicked, immediately contacting my bank. They assured me that they would investigate the charges and issued me a new card. They promised it was a routine security measure, but the call was only the beginning of a much darker ordeal. A few days later, the first threatening message arrived. The text came from an unknown number, its content chilling and precise. It referenced my recent financial troubles and included details only someone with access to my personal information could know. "I know about your bank account. If you don't cooperate, things could get worse," the message said. I dismissed it as a phishing attempt or a scam. After all, who would take such risks just to send menacing messages? But the messages didn't stop. They became more frequent and detailed. Each one seemed to unveil more personal information: my home address, my workplace, and even sensitive family details. The sender knew about my recent job change, my car's make and model, and my upcoming travel plans. It was as if they were piecing together my entire life, and the more they knew, the more threatening the messages became. Panic set in as I realized that my identity had been stolen. I scrambled to secure my accounts, changing passwords and alerting financial institutions. I placed fraud alerts on my credit reports and contacted the police to report the theft. Each step I took felt like a drop in a vast ocean of insecurity. Despite my efforts, the threatening messages continued, escalating in both frequency and intensity. One particularly terrifying message detailed an encounter that had never happened but was eerily accurate in its depiction of my daily routine. It described a supposed meeting I'd had with a colleague, mentioning a conversation I'd never had. "You should be careful," the message warned. "Your secrets are not as safe as you think." The feeling of being watched and tracked was suffocating. I installed additional security measures around my home, including cameras and motion sensors. I started varying my routines, avoiding predictable patterns that could be tracked. Yet, no matter how careful I was, the sense of dread never fully dissipated. The threats seemed to invade every aspect of my life. The police investigation was ongoing, but progress was slow. The anonymous nature of the messages made it difficult to trace the sender. The authorities were working to track the origin of the messages and to uncover any leads related to the identity theft, but each day felt like a waiting game. My sense of urgency was matched only by my anxiety as I waited for answers and solutions. In the midst of this turmoil, I sought support from friends and family. Their concern and empathy provided a small comfort, but the personal nature of the threats made it difficult to fully share the depth of my fear. I hesitated to burden them with the details, even as I relied on their emotional support and encouragement. My work life became increasingly challenging as well. The stress and anxiety took a toll on my ability to focus and perform. I struggled to maintain a semblance of normalcy while grappling with the fear that someone was actively targeting me. My professional life became a balancing act between my mounting personal concerns and my responsibilities at work. As weeks turned into months, I began to see some progress. The police were able to identify certain patterns and connections that pointed to a specific suspect, a person with a history of similar crimes. They were able to make an arrest, which provided a sense of relief. The authorities assured me that the investigation would continue, and they were working to recover stolen information and prevent further breaches. The arrest of the suspect didn't immediately resolve all of my concerns. The process of repairing the damage done to my credit and identity was arduous and time-consuming. I had to work with credit bureaus, financial institutions, and various agencies to rectify the issues. It was a long and exhausting process filled with paperwork and numerous follow-ups. Despite the ongoing challenges, there was a sense of closure as the legal process took its course. The suspect was charged with identity theft and related crimes, and their actions were being prosecuted. The emotional scars remained, though, and I continued to be vigilant about my personal security. The experience had transformed my sense of safety and trust. I had learned to navigate a world where privacy was fragile and personal information could be exploited in terrifying ways. I continued to work with financial institutions to monitor my accounts closely, ensuring that no further unauthorized activity occurred. I also remained in touch with the police and legal representatives to stay updated on the progress of the case and any potential restitution. Though the immediate danger had passed, the psychological impact lingered. I found myself frequently reassessing my surroundings and being cautious about sharing personal information. Simple tasks like answering phone calls or checking emails now carried an added layer of apprehension. The experience had made me acutely aware of the potential for breaches and the importance of proactive measures to safeguard one's identity. Gradually, I began to rebuild my sense of normalcy. I attended counseling sessions to address the emotional toll the ordeal had taken on me. The process was slow, but I found solace in understanding that I was not alone in facing such challenges. Many others had navigated similar situations and emerged stronger on the other side. In the end, while the immediate threats had been addressed and legal actions taken, the incident left an indelible mark on my life. I had become a staunch advocate for digital privacy and security, sharing my experiences with others to raise awareness about the risks of identity theft and the importance of protecting personal information. The journey from victimhood to recovery had been arduous, filled with moments of fear and uncertainty. Yet it was also a testament to resilience and the power of vigilance. Through the support of loved ones, the diligence of law enforcement, and my own efforts to rebuild and fortify my personal security, I had managed to reclaim a semblance of control and move forward from the harrowing experience. Story 14. It began on an ordinary Tuesday morning when I noticed something peculiar about my phone's behavior. The battery seemed to drain unusually fast, and there were sporadic, unexplained spikes in data usage. I brushed it off as a glitch or a possible app update issue. It wasn't until I started receiving strange notifications and ads tailored specifically to places I had visited that I became genuinely concerned. My initial suspicion was that some app I had downloaded was responsible for the intrusion. I decided to investigate further, beginning with a thorough review of my phone's installed apps. Most were familiar, but I took the precaution of checking each one's permissions. That's when I discovered an app that I didn't recognize. It was named something innocuous: weather tracker or health monitor, but it had extensive access to my location and personal data. I immediately attempted to delete the app, but it didn't disappear. Instead, a message popped up, warning me that removing the app could have unintended consequences. This was alarming. I hadn't experienced anything like this before, and it made me realize that something more sinister was at play. Determined to get to the bottom of this, I began researching the app online. To my horror, I found that it was a well-known tool used for covert tracking and surveillance. It had been designed to monitor users' locations and activities without their consent. The realization hit me hard. My every move had been tracked, recorded, and presumably monitored by someone who had unauthorized access to my phone. I knew I needed professional help. I reached out to a cybersecurity expert named Mark, who had come highly recommended. I explained the situation in detail, and he agreed to meet with me that afternoon. Mark arrived at my apartment with an assortment of diagnostic tools and a serious demeanor. He started by analyzing my phone, running a series of scans to identify any malware or suspicious software. His eyes narrowed as he scrutinized the data, and he confirmed my worst fears. The app had been secretly logging my exact movements over the past few weeks, including locations I had visited, places I frequented, and even sensitive information about my daily routine. Mark was able to trace the app's origin and determine that it had been installed through a combination of phishing tactics and social engineering. It turned out that the app had been disguised as a legitimate application, tricking me into granting it access to my location data and other permissions. The next step was to remove the app and secure my phone. Mark worked meticulously, ensuring that all traces of the malicious software were eradicated. He also installed advanced security measures to prevent any future breaches and advised me on best practices for safeguarding my digital privacy. As we worked together, Mark provided insight into how pervasive and sophisticated modern surveillance techniques could be. He explained that such tracking apps could be used for various purposes, some legitimate, like parental control or employee monitoring, but others were far more nefarious. The idea that someone could use such technology to invade my privacy was deeply unsettling. With the app removed and my phone secured, I began to reflect on how this breach had affected me. I realized that my daily life had been under constant scrutiny. The knowledge that my movements had been monitored left me feeling violated and vulnerable. I started to scrutinize my past activities, trying to piece together who might have had access to my phone and why they would target me. I approached the police with the evidence Mark had gathered. They took the matter seriously and began an investigation into the potential perpetrator. The authorities were able to track the app's distribution network and, eventually, Identify a suspect, a former acquaintance with whom I had a falling out months earlier. This individual had apparently harbored a grudge and resorted to using the tracking app to invade my privacy. The case was complex, and legal proceedings took time, but the investigation led to the suspect being charged with unauthorized surveillance and invasion of privacy. The experience was a reminder of the delicate balance between technology's benefits and its potential for abuse. As time went on, I took additional steps to ensure my digital security. I became more vigilant about the apps I downloaded, the permissions I granted, and the security settings on my devices. I also educated myself on cybersecurity best practices and became an advocate for digital privacy among my friends and family. Despite the sense of violation and the ongoing legal process, I found a measure of closure in knowing that my privacy had been restored, and that steps were being taken to hold the responsible party accountable. The experience had left a lasting impact on me, reinforcing the importance of being cautious and proactive in protecting one's personal information in an increasingly connected world. Story 15. The discovery began on an unremarkable Thursday. I had been meaning to tackle the clutter in the basement for months, and finally, a free afternoon presented itself. The basement was a space that rarely saw much use beyond storage. It was a large, somewhat damp area with exposed wooden beams and concrete walls. Over the years, it had become a catch-all for old furniture, seasonal decorations, and forgotten boxes. As I descended the creaky wooden stairs, a familiar musty smell greeted me, mingled with the faint scent of mildew. I flipped on the basement's single overhead light, which flickered before settling into a dim, uneven glow. I began sorting through a stack of boxes filled with old books and knickknacks, but soon I felt the need to clear out a particularly cluttered corner. It was there, hidden behind an old wardrobe and a stack of old photo albums, that I found something unusual. Partially obscured by dust and cobwebs was a large, heavy box. It was made of sturdy cardboard and had clearly been shoved into the corner with little care. Intrigued, I dragged the box out into the open and opened it. Inside, I found a collection of rolled-up drawings and sketches, all neatly organized. The drawings were detailed and well executed, and they depicted various rooms and angles of my house with an unsettling accuracy. At first, I assumed these were simply architectural plans or old drawings from renovations, but as I unrolled more of the sketches, the content grew increasingly disturbing. Each drawing was marked with precise annotations, noting specific times and dates. They detailed not just the layout of the house, but also the locations of furniture, personal items, and even the positions of family photographs on the walls. It was as if someone had meticulously mapped out every corner of our home. But it wasn't just the house that was illustrated, there were also sketches of my family rendered with startling detail. The drawings of my family were the most chilling. They depicted us in various states of activity, eating dinner, watching television, even sleeping. Each sketch was rendered in a realistic style, capturing not only our physical likenesses but also our expressions and gestures. It became clear that the artist had been watching us for a long time, documenting our daily routines with a disturbing level of precision. As I sorted through the drawings, I stumbled upon a tattered journal tucked away at the bottom of the box. I hesitated before opening it, feeling an increasing sense of dread. The journal was filled with handwritten notes detailing the daily activities of our family and the artist's observations. The entries were dated and meticulously written, with descriptions of our interactions, habits, and personal moments. The journal revealed an unnerving reality: someone had been living in the basement, observing us from the shadows. The entries described how the artist had made secret modifications to the basement to make it habitable, adding insulation, setting up a makeshift bed, and creating hidden compartments for their belongings. It was evident that this person had been living there undetected for an extended period, covertly watching and documenting our lives. My heart raced as I read through the journal. The sense of violation was overwhelming. The basement, once a space I had thought was merely cluttered and forgotten, had been turned into a hidden lair for an intruder. The artist had even detailed their methods for avoiding detection, how they would only emerge at night when the house was quiet, and how they had managed to stay hidden from view. In a state of shock, I knew I had to act immediately. I called the authorities, explaining the situation and providing them with the drawings and journal. The police arrived promptly and began their investigation. They conducted a thorough search of the basement, looking for any additional evidence or hidden compartments. Their search revealed several small, inconspicuous hiding spots that had been cleverly concealed, but no sign of the intruder themselves. The police took the drawings, journal, and any other evidence they could find for further analysis. They assured me that they would investigate thoroughly, but given the complexity of the case, and the apparent sophistication of the intruder, I understood that answers might not come quickly. In the meantime, I had to take steps to ensure the safety of my family. I increased the security measures in and around our home, installing additional cameras and alarms. I also contacted a security expert to conduct a full assessment of our property and provide recommendations for further improvements. The entire experience left me with a profound sense of unease. The knowledge that someone had been living undetected in our home, observing our private moments, was deeply disturbing. It altered my perception of our sanctuary, turning it into a place tainted by an invasion of privacy. As days turned into weeks, the investigation continued, but the trail grew cold. The police were able to determine that the intruder had likely fled, leaving behind only the drawings and journal as remnants of their unsettling presence. While the immediate threat had been removed, the psychological impact of the breach lingered. The basement, once a space of forgotten storage, was now a stark reminder of the intrusion into our private lives. Though we had taken steps to enhance our security and protect ourselves, the memory of the hidden compartment and the detailed drawings haunted us. It served as a chilling reminder of the lengths to which someone might go to invade our sense of safety and privacy. The experience underscored the importance of vigilance and the need to be ever aware of the hidden threat that might lurk in the most unexpected places. It left a lasting mark on our sense of security, transforming our home from a place of comfort into a reminder of the fragility of our private sanctuary. Story 16. It was a cool autumn evening when my friend Sarah first confided in me about her growing unease. We had been close for years, sharing everything from our triumphs to our troubles, so when she told me she was feeling followed, I was immediately concerned. Sarah had always been a remarkably perceptive person, and if she said she was being followed by someone she didn't recognize, I knew it wasn't something to be taken lightly. Her initial mention of the unsettling experience came during a casual phone call. She described an unnerving situation where for several days she'd been noticing a figure tailing her as she went about her routine. The person was never close enough to clearly identify, but their presence was persistent. They seemed to appear just as she was leaving work, or as she walked her dog in the evening. Despite her attempts to confront or approach the figure, they always seemed to vanish into the crowd. I reassured her that it was likely her imagination playing tricks, but I could hear the tension in her voice. Sarah's normally cheerful demeanor was replaced by a palpable sense of anxiety. She mentioned that she was thinking about changing her daily routines and even considering moving to a different part of town for a while, but she wasn't sure why. She wasn't sure if it would help. Her fear was real, and it was becoming increasingly difficult to dismiss her concerns. A few days later, I received a panicked call from Sarah. Her voice was trembling as she told me that the situation had escalated. She had seen the same figure again, but this time they had been unusually bold, getting close enough for her to catch a glimpse of their face before they disappeared. She was terrified and felt like she was living in a suspenseful thriller that she couldn't escape. She ended the call with a plea for me to come over and help her sort things out. When I arrived at her apartment, the sense of dread was palpable. Sarah's normally tidy and organized home was in disarray. She had clearly been searching for something. Papers were scattered, drawers left open, and furniture had been moved. Sarah met me at the door, her eyes red and puffy, and led me inside. She was visibly shaken, her hands trembling as she recounted her latest encounter. "I don't know what to do," she said, her voice cracking. "I feel like I'm being watched all the time. It's like someone knows my every move." I offered her comfort, but I could see that her fear was not without cause. We decided to go through her apartment together, hoping to find something that might explain her anxiety. We started by checking her front door and windows, making sure they were secure. Then we moved on to her bedroom, where I noticed a series of unsettling items hidden among her personal belongings. In her closet, tucked behind a row of coats, I found a small, inconspicuous box. Inside were various items that made my stomach churn: a collection of photographs of Sarah taken from different angles and at various locations around the city. The photos were clearly taken without her knowledge, capturing her at different times of day and from distances that suggested someone had been following her for a while. Alongside the photographs were notes written in a spidery, unfamiliar handwriting. The notes contained detailed observations about Sarah's routines, including the times she left for work, her favorite places to shop, and even the names of some of her friends. The notes seemed to chronicle her daily life with unnerving precision. One note even mentioned her recent visit to a coffee shop, noting her interactions with the barista and the time she spent there. The realization of what I was seeing hit me like a ton of bricks. The evidence was irrefutable. Sarah had been under surveillance, and it was clear that someone had been monitoring her movements meticulously. The sense of violation was overwhelming, and I could see the fear etched deeply into Sarah's face. We took the photographs and notes to the police, hoping they would take the situation seriously. The officers were concerned but cautious. They took detailed statements from both of us and promised to investigate. They suggested that Sarah increase her security measures and be cautious about her routines. They also recommended that she avoid making sudden changes that could inadvertently alert the person following her. In the days that followed, Sarah became increasingly reclusive. She altered her routines, avoided places she frequented, and stayed indoors as much as possible. The anxiety of being constantly watched took a toll on her mental health, and I did my best to support her, though it was clear that this was a struggle far beyond simple reassurance. The police investigation continued, but progress was slow. They conducted a search of Sarah's apartment for any additional evidence and canvassed the area around her home for potential witnesses. Despite their efforts, the identity of the person following Sarah remained a mystery. As time went on, the intensity of Sarah's fear began to wane slightly, though the sense of being watched never fully left her. The experience had left a lasting impact on both of us. Sarah's vigilance was heightened, and she took additional measures to protect her privacy, including installing security cameras around her home and making sure her online presence was secure. The entire ordeal had underscored the fragility of personal security and the pervasive impact of having one's privacy invaded. While the immediate threat seemed to diminish over time, the psychological scars of knowing someone had been monitoring her every move lingered. For Sarah, the experience became a cautionary tale about the importance of being vigilant and proactive in safeguarding one's privacy. For me, it was a sobering reminder of how easily our lives can be disrupted by the intrusion of others, even though the mystery of who had been following Sarah remained unsolved. The strength and resilience she displayed in the face of such a harrowing situation were a testament to her courage and the unwavering support of those around her. Story 17. Returning home from a week-long vacation was always a bittersweet experience. On one hand, there was the joy of returning to familiar surroundings. On the other, the weight of laundry and unpacking awaited. The drive home was pleasant enough, and the sun was setting beautifully as I pulled into my driveway. I parked my car, grabbed my bags, and entered the house, expecting the usual welcoming quiet. But as soon as I stepped through the door, I noticed something was off. The first clue was the lack of the comforting hum of my refrigerator. I frowned, puzzled by the sudden silence. My home was always alive with subtle sounds, the soft purr of the AC, the distant creak of floorboards. Now, there was an eerie stillness. I dropped my bags in the foyer and glanced around, immediately struck by a feeling of disorientation. The layout of my living room seemed wrong. The furniture had been rearranged, the sofa was where the coffee table should be, and the armchair was in a completely different corner. My initial confusion quickly turned to unease as I moved through the house, discovering that every room had been similarly altered. The dining room, too, was disconcertingly different. The chairs were stacked haphazardly, and the dining table had been moved against the wall. The arrangement of my kitchen items was also off. My dishes were now piled in strange configurations on the counter, and the kitchen utensils were neatly lined up in a way that didn't make sense to me. Everything appeared as though someone had meticulously rearranged it, yet there was no sign of disorder or mess. Despite the unnerving changes, nothing appeared to be missing. My electronics, valuables, and personal items were all accounted for. There were no signs of forced entry. The doors and windows were securely locked, and there were no broken locks or damaged frames. The absence of any clear sign of a break-in added to the unsettling atmosphere. It was as though someone had entered my home, moved things around, and left without leaving a trace. I felt a creeping sense of paranoia as I continued my inspection. The bedroom was no exception. Clothing had been taken out of drawers and scattered across the bed, and even the arrangement of my bookshelves had been altered. The personal touches that made my home uniquely mine had been shifted into unfamiliar configurations. My mind raced with questions. Had someone been here while I was away? Was this some kind of elaborate prank? But the lack of theft or vandalism was confusing. It was almost as if the intruder had been more interested in disrupting my space than in taking anything of value. The meticulousness of the rearrangement suggested a deliberate, calculated act rather than random chaos. I contacted the police, reporting the incident with a detailed account of what I had found. An officer arrived shortly after, taking a careful look around the house and noting the changes. The officer was polite but clearly puzzled. They took photographs of the rearranged rooms and made notes of the unusual state of the home. As the officer conducted their investigation, I took the opportunity to examine the house further. I looked for any potential clues or evidence that might have been missed. There were no fingerprints on the surfaces or any items out of place that seemed significant. It was as if the person who had come in had been incredibly careful not to leave any trace. The officer assured me that they would conduct a thorough investigation, but explained that cases like this could be difficult to resolve, especially when no clear evidence of a break-in was present. They suggested reviewing any security camera footage, if available, and advised me to document everything I had noticed. I checked my home security system, but the footage from the week of my vacation revealed nothing unusual. The cameras had recorded normal activity outside the house, but there were no signs of any unusual movements or people entering through the doors. The lack of footage was disheartening, adding to the eerie atmosphere of the situation. Over the next few days, I found it hard to shake off the feeling of unease. Each time I entered a room, the altered arrangement struck me as a constant reminder of the invasion of privacy. I was meticulous about reorganizing everything back to its original state, but the sense of violation remained. I spoke with neighbors and friends, hoping to gather any additional information or insights. No one had seen or heard anything out of the ordinary, and there were no reports of suspicious activity in the area. It seemed that the rearrangement was an isolated incident with no clear motive or explanation. As time went on, the feeling of discomfort gradually faded, though it never fully disappeared. The experience left me with a heightened sense of vigilance and an increased awareness of the need to secure my home. I invested in additional security measures, including more advanced alarm systems and motion sensors, to ensure that I would be better protected in the future. The incident remained a troubling mystery, a reminder of how easily one's sense of security can be disrupted. While the physical evidence of the intrusion was minimal, the psychological impact was significant. I had learned a valuable lesson about the fragility of personal privacy and the need for vigilance in an unpredictable world. The rearranged house had become a symbol of the delicate boundary between safety and intrusion, a constant reminder to remain cautious and aware. Story 18. The morning started like any other. I was groggily making my way out of bed, eager for the comforting routine of my morning coffee. The first rays of sunlight were filtering through the curtains as I shuffled into the bathroom. As I reached for the light switch, a strange sensation of unease began to creep over me, but I dismissed it as remnants of a bad dream. I turned on the bathroom light and froze. Written across the mirror in bold, crimson-red lipstick was a message that took my breath away. The letters were large and hastily scrawled, the color stark against the pristine white of the mirror. The message read, "I see you and I know everything. Your plans, your fears, your secrets." I stood there, numb, my heart pounding in my chest. The words seemed to echo off the tiles, reverberating through my mind. I scanned the message again, my eyes darting across the letters as if willing them to disappear. This was no ordinary prank, it was deeply personal, unsettlingly precise. The lipstick itself was a shade I didn't recognize, and it wasn't something I had in my bathroom. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing thoughts. I had never had any issues with stalkers or threats before, and I struggled to understand why someone would target me. My mind raced through the list of people I interacted with regularly, friends, family, colleagues, trying to make sense of who could be behind this. I grabbed my phone and took pictures of the message, wanting to document the evidence in case I needed to show it to authorities. My hands were shaking as I composed a message to my closest friend, Laura. I briefly described what I had found and asked if we could meet up as soon as possible. I needed someone to talk to, someone who could help me process the shock of this bizarre situation. As I waited for Laura to arrive, I tried to calm my nerves. I cleaned the mirror, scrubbing away the lipstick with a combination of glass cleaner and a cloth. The task felt almost symbolic, as if removing the words could somehow erase the fear they had instilled in me. I tried to convince myself that there must be a logical explanation, a reason that made sense in the daylight of reason. When Laura arrived, she was visibly concerned. She took one look at the photos and the cleaned mirror and immediately expressed her support. She suggested we contact the police and report the incident. It was a sensible suggestion, but I hesitated. I didn't want to seem alarmist or overreacting, but the gravity of the message was too serious to ignore. Together, we visited the local police station and reported the incident. The officer who took our statement listened carefully and assured us that they would look into it. They asked for a detailed account of what had happened and took note of the peculiar details, such as the use of lipstick and the specific nature of the message. They promised to increase patrols in the area and advised me to be vigilant. Returning home, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The normalcy of my house felt tainted by the recent invasion of privacy. I began to question whether someone had been observing me, perhaps following me, or even spying on my daily routine. I started to reconsider my daily habits, the places I frequented, and the people I interacted with. Laura stayed with me for the rest of the day, providing comfort and distraction. We spent the afternoon discussing possible scenarios and trying to piece together any clues that might explain the incident. Laura's presence helped alleviate some of my anxiety, but the sense of invasion lingered, making me hyper-aware of every sound and shadow. Over the next few days, life seemed to return to a semblance of normality. The police kept in touch, informing me that they were following up on leads and checking for any surveillance footage in the vicinity. However, as time passed, I felt a growing frustration. There were no new developments, and the sense of vulnerability remained constant. I took extra precautions to secure my home. I changed the locks, installed additional security cameras, and made sure that my windows and doors were locked at all times. Despite these measures, I still felt uneasy, unable to fully relax in my own space. One afternoon, as I was cleaning the house, I found a note slipped under my front door. The handwriting was different from the message on the mirror, but the tone was eerily similar. It read, "You can't hide. I know what you're doing." I was on edge. The new note confirmed that someone was still trying to intrude into my life. I showed it to the police, who assured me they were doing everything they could, but there were no immediate leads. The combination of these experiences left me feeling on edge. I grew more cautious about my routines and interactions. The sense of being watched was ever present, and I found myself increasingly wary of the people around me. The comfort of my home was overshadowed by the anxiety of not knowing who might be behind these unsettling messages. Weeks turned into months, and while the intensity of the situation waned, the impact remained. I learned to navigate my heightened sense of caution, balancing my need for safety with the desire to reclaim my sense of normalcy. The experience had altered my perception of privacy and personal security, serving as a stark reminder of how quickly the familiar could become unsettlingly unfamiliar. Story 19. It was a cool autumn day when I made the decision to hire a new babysitter for my 2 children. Balancing a demanding job and family life meant that finding someone trustworthy was always a priority, and after an extensive search and several interviews, I felt confident in my choice. Emily, a young woman with glowing references and a warm demeanor, seemed like the perfect fit. She had an impressive background in childcare and came highly recommended by a close friend who had recently moved away. The first few days with Emily were smooth. My children, Sarah and Max, took to her immediately. They talked animatedly about their day with her when I returned from work, and the house seemed to have a positive energy whenever she was around. Emily was punctual, attentive, and appeared to genuinely care for the kids, which was exactly what I had hoped for. However, a few weeks into Emily's tenure, I started to notice small things that felt slightly off. It began with subtle changes in Sarah's and Max's behavior. They seemed a bit more withdrawn and hesitant to talk about their time with Emily. Initially, I dismissed it as normal adjustment issues or perhaps a phase they were going through, but the changes became more pronounced, and my parental instincts told me something was amiss. One evening, after a particularly hectic day at work, I decided to install a security camera in the living room. It was a measure I had been considering for some time, not out of distrust but to ensure the safety and security of our home. I chose a discreet, high-resolution camera that could be monitored remotely, hoping to have a bit of peace of mind. The camera was installed and set up without much fanfare. I configured it to record continuously, and it connected seamlessly to an app on my phone. For the first few days, I reviewed the footage infrequently, mostly just to ensure that everything was functioning correctly. It wasn't until I had an unexpected day off and found myself at home that I decided to review some of the recorded footage more closely. I sat down with a cup of coffee and began scrolling through the recordings. At first, the footage was uneventful: Emily engaging with the children, playing games and helping with homework. But as I continued watching, I began to notice something unsettling. There were moments when Emily was alone with the children, speaking to them in a manner that felt increasingly disconcerting. Her comments were subtle but disturbing. I saw her making remarks that were more controlling than nurturing. She would say things like, "You should always listen to me. I know what's best for you, and if you don't behave, there will be consequences." The tone was not harsh, but there was an undertone of manipulation that set my alarm bells ringing. My heart pounded as I watched her interaction with the kids grow more unsettling. The most alarming footage was captured on a weekend afternoon. Emily had taken Sarah and Max to the living room for what appeared to be a storytelling session. Instead of engaging them with friendly stories or activities, Emily's comments took a darker turn. She talked to them about how important it was to keep secrets from their parents and how they should be careful about whom they trust. The way she said these things was eerie, leaving me feeling as though something was deeply wrong. I replayed the footage multiple times, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. I wanted to believe that I was misinterpreting her behavior or that there was a benign explanation for her comments. But the more I watched, the clearer it became that something was amiss. The comments were more than just unsettling; they seemed manipulative and potentially harmful. My immediate concern was for the safety and well-being of Sarah and Max. I needed to act quickly but carefully to ensure they were protected. I decided to confront Emily, but I knew I had to be tactful. I wanted to avoid creating a confrontation that might escalate or cause undue stress to my children. I called Emily and asked to have a meeting the next day. I requested a casual conversation about how things were going and whether there were any issues. Emily agreed, and we set a time for the following afternoon. In the meantime, I arranged for my children to spend the day with a trusted friend, ensuring that they were safe and away from the situation. When Emily arrived for the meeting, I was calm but firm. I expressed that I had installed a security camera for security reasons and that I had reviewed some footage. I framed the conversation in a way that suggested I was simply seeking clarification about a few things I had noticed. Emily's reaction was initially one of surprise, but as I discussed the specific incidents, her demeanor shifted. She became defensive and evasive, offering vague explanations that did little to reassure me. I decided that I could no longer continue with her services. I thanked her for her time and informed her that I would be ending her employment effective immediately. Emily's expression was one of frustration mixed with a touch of fear, but she did not protest. I escorted her out of the house and made sure she left with no further incident. Afterward, I took the necessary steps to secure my home and ensure that my children felt safe. I also sought professional advice to help Sarah and Max process the experience and to address any concerns they might have had. It was crucial to reassure them that they were safe and that their feelings and experiences were taken seriously. The experience was a harsh reminder of the importance of vigilance and the need to trust one's instincts. The breach of trust with Emily was deeply unsettling, but the protective measures I took helped to restore a sense of security for my family. The hidden camera, while initially installed for peace of mind, proved to be a crucial tool in uncovering the unsettling truth about someone I had trusted with my children's care. Story 20. The day started like any other, with the usual hustle of getting ready for work and navigating the morning rush. As I returned home that evening, I noticed a small, unmarked package waiting at my doorstep. It was a plain, brown box with no return address or identifying labels, just my name and the delivery address scrawled on the side. My curiosity was piqued, but given the myriad of online purchases I'd made recently, I assumed it was just another parcel that had slipped through the cracks of proper delivery. After bringing the package inside, I set it down on the kitchen counter and considered opening it. The lack of a return address was unusual, but I figured it was likely just an oversight. I retrieved a pair of scissors from the drawer and carefully cut through the tape, opening the box to reveal its contents. Inside, there was a plain black cassette tape and a small handwritten note. The note was simple, with just a few words scribbled in a hurried scrawl. "Listen carefully." My pulse quickened as I picked up the cassette. It was an older format, something I hadn't seen in years. I didn't even own a cassette player, which made the whole situation even more puzzling. I decided to go to my neighbor, Mr. Thompson, who had always been a bit of a tech enthusiast and might still have a cassette player lying around. As I walked next door, I tried to shake off the unease that was creeping over me. Mr. Thompson greeted me warmly and, upon hearing my request, rummaged through his storage closet to find an old player. Back in my apartment, I set up the cassette player on my coffee table and inserted the tape. The mechanical whirring of the player filled the silence as the tape began to play. I settled onto the couch, bracing myself for whatever was about to unfold. The tape started with a crackle, then a familiar voice began to speak. I almost leaped out of my seat when I realized it was my own voice. The recording was me, speaking in a calm, almost detached tone. At first, the content seemed innocuous reflections on daily life and mundane observations, but as the tape progressed, it took a darker turn. The voice on the tape started to articulate my deepest fears and anxieties. It spoke of my fear of losing loved ones, the anxiety of facing an unknown future, and a profound sense of isolation. The recording seemed to tap into my innermost thoughts, the ones I rarely voiced aloud. It was as if someone had been watching me closely and knew exactly what to say to disturb me. My heart raced as the voice on the tape delved deeper, recounting specific events from my life, moments of vulnerability that I had never shared with anyone. The recording seemed to be an intimate, disturbing reflection of my private thoughts, a terrifying revelation that someone had been monitoring my life in a way I can't comprehend. The tape continued for what felt like an eternity, and by the time it ended, I was shaken. I ejected the tape and stared at it, trying to make sense of the situation. Who could have made this recording, and why would they send it to me? The note with the tape didn't provide any clues, and the lack of a return address meant there was no way to trace its origins. I felt a growing sense of paranoia. Every creak in the apartment seemed amplified. Every shadow felt menacing. I needed to talk to someone about this, so I called the police. They arrived promptly and listened to my account of the package and the disturbing contents of the tape. They took the tape for further analysis and promised to investigate, but they seemed as baffled as I was. The following days were a blur of anxiety and sleepless nights. I constantly felt like I was being watched, and the sense of intrusion was almost overwhelming. I began to question everyone and everything around me, trying to pinpoint who might have had access to such personal information. Friends and family were puzzled by my behavior, but they were supportive, if not entirely understanding of the situation. As the police investigation dragged on, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I reviewed every detail of my daily routines, interactions, and any possible sources of information leaks. I started to keep a detailed log of everything that happened around me, hoping to find some clue or pattern that might explain the tape. Weeks passed, and while the police continued their investigation, they were unable to provide any substantial leads. The recording was enigmatic, with no traceable origins or clear evidence pointing to a suspect. The case was eventually classified as unresolved, leaving me with more questions than answers. I took steps to secure my privacy more diligently, installing new locks, security cameras, and changing my routines to be less predictable. Despite these precautions, the sense of unease never fully left me. The experience had left a lasting impact on my psyche, and the memory of that tape haunted me. In the end, the mysterious package and the eerie recording became a part of my life's narrative, a haunting reminder of the vulnerability of personal privacy and the unsettling possibility that someone might be watching from the shadows. The experience made me more cautious and aware of my surroundings, and although I never discovered the full story behind the tape, it served as a chilling lesson in the fragility of security and the deep recesses of fear. Story 21. It was a typical Wednesday evening when I first noticed something odd about my car. I had just finished a long day at work and was looking forward to heading home. As I approached my car, I noticed that the driver's side door felt unusually heavy, almost as if it had been tampered with. I shrugged it off as a result of my tiredness and unlocked the door. Once inside, I began to adjust my seat and mirror when something caught my eye. Amidst the usual clutter of receipts and old coffee cups, I saw a small, inconspicuous device wedged between the seat and the center console. It was a compact voice recorder, the kind that's often used for interviews or personal notes. My heart skipped a beat as I realized that it was not something I had placed there. With trembling hands, I picked up the recorder and turned it over, examining it closely. It was an older model with a small display and a few buttons, none of which I recognized. I pressed the play button, and to my horror, I heard my own voice. The recording was an exact capture of my conversations and movements while I had been driving. The initial shock was overwhelming. The recording contained snippets of mundane chatter, discussions with friends, phone calls I had taken while driving, even my thoughts as I navigated through traffic. But there was something far more unsettling about the fact that someone had been monitoring my every word and action. I immediately turned off the recorder and took it inside my apartment. I sat down at my kitchen table, trying to process what I had just discovered. My mind raced with questions. Who could have planted the recorder? Why would they want to record my conversations? I needed answers, but my first step was to contact the authorities. I called the police and reported the incident, explaining that I had found a hidden voice recorder in my car that appeared to be recording my conversations without my knowledge. An officer arrived at my apartment within the hour, and I handed over the recorder along with the details of my discovery. The officer took the device for further examination and assured me that they would investigate. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the sense of paranoia and violation. Every time I got into my car, I felt a pang of anxiety, as though I was being watched or listened to. I began to scrutinize every detail of my daily routine, trying to figure out if there were any clues to who might be behind the invasion of privacy. The police investigation was thorough but slow-moving. They examined the recorder for fingerprints, traces of tampering, and any other evidence that might point to a suspect. Unfortunately, the investigation yielded little information. The recorder had been wiped clean of any identifying marks or traces of who might have planted it. In the meantime, I decided to take my own precautions. I had my car thoroughly checked by a professional for any other hidden devices or tampering. I also started keeping a log of any unusual or suspicious activity around my vehicle. I began to notice that my once routine parking spots and driving routes now seemed to be filled with an unnerving sense of scrutiny. I reached out to friends and family, sharing my concerns and asking if anyone had experienced similar issues. None of them had, but they were sympathetic and offered support. The lack of concrete evidence and the inability to identify a suspect left me feeling isolated and vulnerable. As weeks turned into months, the police investigation remained at a standstill. The recorder had been of little help in uncovering the perpetrator's identity or motives. The case was eventually classified as unresolved, leaving me with a lingering sense of unease. In the absence of any new leads, I took proactive measures to protect my privacy. I installed a new security system at home and ensured that my car was regularly inspected for any further tampering. I also became more cautious about discussing personal matters, even in what I thought were private settings. The experience left a lasting impact on me. It was a stark reminder of the potential for invasion of privacy and the lengths to which someone might go to monitor another person. The sense of being watched or listened to, even when I was alone, became a persistent part of my daily life. I never discovered who was behind the hidden recorder or what their intentions had been. The mystery remained unresolved, but the incident served as a powerful lesson in vigilance and the importance of safeguarding one's privacy. Despite the passage of time, the memory of finding that recorder and the unsettling realization that my conversations had been monitored stayed with me, shaping how I approached both my personal security and my interactions with others. In the end, while the case might have remained unsolved, the experience was a sobering reminder of the need for awareness and the importance of taking control of one's own privacy in an increasingly intrusive world. Story 22. The first package arrived on a chilly November morning, its presence on my doorstep barely noticeable among the usual clutter of junk mail and deliveries. It was a small, plain box wrapped in brown paper, devoid of any markings or labels. My curiosity was piqued, but I shrugged it off as a misdelivered package or perhaps a gift from a friend who had forgotten to include a note. I brought the box inside and carefully opened it. Inside was a single item, a framed photograph of myself taken from a distance during a recent outing to the park. I was initially startled by the image, but I dismissed it as a strange coincidence or an odd joke. I checked the box again, hoping to find a note or any clue about who had sent it, but there was nothing, no name, no address, just an unsettling photo. Over the next few days, more packages began to arrive. Each one was similar in appearance, a plain, unmarked box with no indication of the sender. The items inside were increasingly disturbing. One package contained a handwritten note that mentioned details of my recent trip to a nearby city, including a specific cafe I had visited and the clothes I had worn. Another box held a collection of old, faded receipts from a store where I shopped frequently, including some that I had forgotten about. The most unsettling package arrived one evening while I was cooking dinner. This box contained a small bundle of items from my trash and old grocery receipt, a crumpled ticket stub, and an empty envelope with my name and address on it. It was clear that someone had been going through my garbage and collecting personal information. I felt a growing sense of dread and paranoia, unsure of who could be targeting me or why. As the days went by, the frequency of the packages increased. Each one brought new, unsettling items: a copy of a personal letter I had written to a friend, a snippet of a conversation I had with a neighbor, and even a lock of hair that seemed to have been cut from a brush I had used. It became evident that someone was not only observing my life, but was also deliberately intruding into my personal space. I decided to take action. I contacted the local authorities and reported the situation. The police took the matter seriously, and an officer came to my home to collect the packages and examine the evidence. They assured me that they would investigate the issue and try to identify the source of the disturbing deliveries. In the meantime, they advised me to be vigilant and to report any further suspicious activity. While waiting for the investigation to progress, I took additional precautions to secure my home. I installed extra locks on my doors, added security cameras around the perimeter, and even set up motion-activated lights in the yard. Despite these efforts, the sense of violation lingered. The idea that someone had been monitoring my every move was deeply unsettling. The police investigation revealed that the packages had been sent from different locations, making it difficult to trace the sender. Each package was meticulously prepared, with no obvious clues about the person behind them. The authorities suggested that the sender might be using a variety of methods to avoid detection, including using fake addresses or stolen identities. As time went on, I received fewer packages, but the fear and anxiety persisted. The intrusion into my personal life had left me feeling exposed and vulnerable. I found myself second-guessing every interaction and becoming increasingly cautious about my surroundings. I was hyper-aware of every detail, constantly looking over my shoulder and scrutinizing the people around me. The situation took a turn for the worse when I began receiving anonymous phone calls in the middle of the night. The calls were brief and silent, but the unsettling nature of the calls added to my growing sense of paranoia. I reported the calls to the authorities, and they traced the calls to a payphone several miles away. The investigation continued, but the perpetrator remained elusive. Eventually, the packages stopped arriving, and the phone calls ceased. The police were unable to identify the person responsible or determine their motives. The investigation remained open, but the lack of tangible leads made it difficult to make progress. The experience left me deeply shaken. The once familiar comforts of my home had become a source of fear and anxiety. The sense of invasion into my personal life was profound, and I struggled to regain a sense of normalcy. I found solace in discussing the ordeal with friends and family, who offered support and reassurance. The incident also made me more aware of the importance of personal privacy and security. I became more vigilant about safeguarding my personal information and took steps to ensure that my home was secure. I also sought therapy to help process the trauma and anxiety caused by the experience. While the identity of the sender remained a mystery, the ordeal served as a stark reminder of the vulnerabilities we face in an increasingly connected world. The packages, once symbols of intrusion, became a catalyst for change, prompting me to take greater control of my privacy and security. The experience, though deeply unsettling, ultimately strengthened my resolve to protect myself and my personal space from unwanted intrusions. In the end, the anonymous packages were not just a disturbing series of events, but a transformative experience that reshaped my understanding of personal safety. The incident underscored the importance of remaining vigilant and proactive in protecting one's privacy in a world where personal boundaries can be so easily breached. Story 23. It was an unusually warm September evening when I first noticed something peculiar. I had just returned from work, exhausted and looking forward to a quiet night at home. As I walked into my kitchen, I glanced out of the window and noticed my trash can sitting beside the curb as usual. It struck me that the garbage collector must have already been by, but something felt off. The next morning, as I went to take out the trash, I saw that my trash can had been rummaged through. The items inside were scattered about haphazardly, as if someone had been sifting through them. I frowned, thinking it might have been a stray animal or some local kids playing pranks. I tidied up the mess and went about my day, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling that had crept in. However, it wasn't long before the strange occurrences started to repeat. Over the next few weeks, I began to find items in my trash that I had never discarded. It started with an old receipt from a store I hadn't visited in months. Then there was a torn page from a notebook with some personal notes on it. The items seemed too specific and personal to be random garbage left behind. The situation escalated when I found a half-open envelope that had clearly been rifled through. The envelope contained old documents and letters that I had kept for sentimental reasons. Seeing these in the trash was particularly disturbing. I remembered placing the envelope in a secure drawer, and I was certain it had been untouched until now. I felt a growing sense of paranoia. The idea that someone had been going through my trash was both invasive and frightening. It was as if someone was trying to piece together fragments of my life without my consent. I decided to increase my vigilance, making sure to secure my trash properly and monitoring any unusual activity around my home. One night, after a particularly long day at work, I was lying in bed when I heard faint rustling noises coming from outside. My heart raced as I got up to investigate. Peeking through the blinds, I saw a shadowy figure near my trash can. I couldn't make out the person clearly, but the sight confirmed my worst fears. Someone was definitely going through my garbage. The next morning, I decided to take more concrete action. I installed a small security camera near the trash can, hoping to capture any suspicious activity. I also began keeping a closer eye on the area around my home, particularly during the late evening and early morning hours. Days later, I reviewed the footage from the security camera. The images were grainy and not very clear, but they did show someone approaching the trash can and sifting through it. The person's face was obscured, but their actions were unmistakable. They seemed to be searching for something specific, handling the items with a level of care that suggested a deliberate search rather than casual rummaging. I took the footage to the local police station and explained the situation. The officers were concerned but noted that while the behavior was troubling, it might not be illegal unless there was a clear violation of property or personal privacy. They suggested that I continue to monitor the situation and report any additional suspicious behavior. The police advised me to take further steps to protect my personal information. I began shredding any documents that contained sensitive information before discarding them. I also secured my trash can with a lock to prevent any further unauthorized access. Despite these measures, the sense of intrusion lingered, and I remained on high alert. The unsettling incidents continued, albeit sporadically. I occasionally found items in my trash that I hadn't thrown away, though the frequency seemed to diminish. It was as though the person had grown tired or frustrated with their attempts to access my private information. I hoped that the additional security measures had dissuaded them from continuing their invasive behavior. As time went on, the anxiety from the situation began to subside. I remained vigilant but also tried to return to a sense of normalcy. The experience had been a harsh reminder of how vulnerable one can feel when their personal space and privacy are violated. I became more proactive about securing my personal information and more cautious about any unusual activity in my neighborhood. Eventually, the troubling occurrences ceased altogether, and while the exact motivations and identity of the person who rifled through my trash remained unknown, the incident had left a lasting impression. It served as a stark reminder of the importance of safeguarding personal information and the impact that even seemingly minor invasions of privacy can have on one's sense of security. Story 24. The first letter arrived on a rainy Thursday afternoon. I had come home from work, drenched from the downpour, and was about to start a quiet evening when I noticed an envelope sticking out of my mailbox. It was plain and unmarked, save for my name written in a neat, unfamiliar handwriting. I hesitated before opening it, the sense of mystery sending a shiver down my spine. Inside was a letter that detailed a recent dinner party I had hosted, mentioning conversations I had with friends, along with specific comments about the evening's events. The final line of the letter read, "I hope you enjoyed your evening. It was quite the spectacle." At first, I was bewildered. It seemed like a cruel joke or a misguided prank. I had recently moved to this quiet suburban neighborhood, and my social circle was still small. I didn't recognize the handwriting or any clue that might hint at the sender's identity. I dismissed it as an isolated incident and tried to move on with my life. But when the second letter arrived, my unease deepened. It was a week later, and this time the letter described a private conversation I'd had with my sister over the phone. The details were unsettlingly accurate. mentioning personal matters and the specific advice I had given her about a recent job issue. The closing line was chilling. "You seem to give good advice. It's a shame you don't follow it yourself." I was now seriously concerned. I checked my phone for any unusual activity, but everything appeared normal. I also examined my house for signs of tampering or surveillance devices, but there was nothing out of the ordinary. The letters were precise and detailed, suggesting someone had been closely observing my life, but I couldn't imagine who would have such an interest in me, or why. The third letter came with a more personal touch. It mentioned an ongoing dispute I had with a colleague at work, recounting specifics of our interactions and offering a thinly veiled threat: "Be careful where you tread at work, your adversaries are closer than you think." This letter was different. It had a tone of menace, and the details were more intrusive. Feeling increasingly anxious, I decided to take action. I contacted the local police, showing them the letters and explaining my growing fear. They took my concerns seriously and agreed to start an investigation, though they cautioned me that tracing anonymous letters could be challenging. They advised me to keep records of all correspondence and to remain vigilant about any suspicious activity. In the following weeks, I was on high alert. I changed my routines, locked all windows and doors more securely, and avoided discussing personal matters in public places. Despite these precautions, the letters kept coming. Each one was more detailed than the last, describing my daily activities, the people I interacted with, and even my private thoughts and concerns. One particularly disturbing letter described a recent doctor's appointment, including sensitive details about my health that I hadn't shared with anyone except my medical practitioner. The letter ended with the unsettling line, "Your secrets are safe with me for now." I began to question everyone around me, trying to pinpoint who might have access to such intimate details about my life. I reached out to friends and family, asking if they had noticed anything unusual or if they could think of anyone who might hold a grudge. Everyone seemed baffled, and no one could offer a plausible explanation. The police investigation continued, but progress was slow. They were able to analyze the letters and determine that they were printed from a home printer, and the envelope used was generic, offering no clues about the sender. The investigation into the handwriting proved inconclusive, as it was too common and did not match any known suspects. Desperate for answers, I took matters into my own hands. I began to document every detail meticulously. I compiled a log of all the letters, noting the dates, times, and specific content of each one. I also started paying more attention to my surroundings, hoping to catch any sign of someone watching or following me. During this period, I became more aware of my interactions with people. I scrutinized conversations and even considered that someone might have been eavesdropping on my private discussions. I tried to remember if I had mentioned anything in passing that could have been used in the letters. It was a nerve-wracking process, as every minor detail seemed significant. One day, while I was sifting through the old letters again, I noticed a pattern I hadn't picked up before. The letters were not random. They followed a timeline that seemed to coincide with my daily activities and locations. The details were sometimes vague, but they always seemed to align with specific times and places. This realization led me to believe that whoever was sending the letters was not just guessing, they were actively tracking my movements. I decided to enlist the help of a private investigator named Alex, who came highly recommended for his work in personal security and surveillance cases. Alex agreed to take on the case and started by reviewing all the evidence I had gathered. He also conducted his own investigation, including reviewing my phone records and any potential digital traces that might reveal the source of the intrusions. Alex's investigation led to a breakthrough when he discovered a pattern in the addresses of the letters. The postmarks indicated that they were sent from various locations around the city, but all of them were close to a central point, a small office building that I had passed by several times. This led him to suspect that the sender was using a rented mailbox or a drop point to send the letters anonymously. With this new lead, Alex focused on tracking down the office building and identifying potential suspects. Surveillance of the building revealed a man who frequently visited the drop point. He was a former private investigator who had lost his license due to unethical behavior. The pieces began to fall into place when we learned that he had a history of harassing former clients and using surveillance techniques for personal gain. Alex and the police managed to connect the dots, revealing that the man had been using his knowledge of surveillance to gather information on me and send the threatening letters. His motive seemed to be a mix of personal vendetta and a twisted sense of revenge. He had somehow obtained my contact information and used it to invade my privacy. The authorities apprehended him, and the case was brought to court. The trial was an emotionally draining experience, as it forced me to relive the invasion of my privacy and the fear that had consumed me for months. However, seeing justice served and knowing that the man who had terrorized me was being held accountable provided a sense of relief and closure. In the aftermath, I took steps to ensure my personal security was fortified. I updated my security systems, practiced better digital hygiene, and remained vigilant about my privacy. The experience had left me shaken, but it also underscored the importance of protecting oneself from such invasions and taking proactive measures where necessary. While the sense of violation lingered, I found solace in the fact that the situation was resolved and that I had regained control over my life. The ordeal had been a stark reminder of the lengths to which some individuals would go to invade personal privacy, but it also highlighted the importance of vigilance and resilience in the face of such threats. Story 25. The dinner party had been a success, an evening filled with laughter, good food, and engaging conversation. I had spent weeks planning the event, carefully selecting the menu, arranging the seating, and ensuring every detail was perfect. My guests had arrived in high spirits, and the evening unfolded with a warm, convivial atmosphere that I had hoped for. As the night drew to a close, guests started to depart, thanking me for the lovely evening and expressing their enjoyment. The final goodbyes were exchanged, and I began the task of cleaning up. I was still basking in the satisfaction of a well-executed event when I noticed something unusual while tidying up the living room. A small, black device hidden behind a decorative vase on the side table caught my eye. It looked like a compact, unremarkable piece of technology, something I hadn't seen before. Curious, I picked it up and inspected it. It was a voice recorder, and it seemed to be in the middle of saving a file. A sinking feeling settled in my stomach as I realized what I had found. The device was recording our conversations, capturing the entire evening without our knowledge. I turned the device off and removed the memory card, my mind racing with a mix of shock and dread. Who could have planted this device? How long had it been recording? And, more disturbingly, what had been recorded? I took the memory card to my home office, where I connected it to my computer. As the files began to load, I felt a mounting sense of unease. The audio files were organized by date and time, each labeled with timestamps that corresponded to the evening's events. I clicked on one of the files and listened, my heart pounding as the familiar voices of my guests filled the room. The recording was clear and detailed. I could hear the conversations from different parts of the house, the chatter from the dining room, the laughter from the living room, and even the quieter discussions in the corners of the space. The device had captured everything with disturbing accuracy. The more I listened, the more I realized the depth of the invasion of privacy that had occurred. The recordings included private conversations and intimate details shared between my guests. There were moments of personal reflection, whispered confidences, and even jokes that were meant to be shared among friends. Hearing these conversations replayed with such clarity made me feel deeply violated. The thought that someone had been secretly monitoring and recording these interactions was both unsettling and infuriating. I needed to take action immediately. I contacted the local authorities, explaining the situation and providing them with the voice recorder and memory card. They arrived swiftly and took the device for further analysis. The officers were professional and concerned, but they also warned me that identifying the person responsible might be challenging, especially if the intruder had covered their tracks well. While waiting for the investigation to progress, I tried to make sense of the situation. I reviewed the security footage from the evening, hoping to find any clues about who might have planted the device. The footage showed guests mingling and enjoying themselves, but there was no sign of anyone acting suspiciously or tampering with the environment. The police began their investigation by interviewing my guests, trying to determine if anyone had noticed anything unusual or if there were any potential motives for the intrusion. The conversations revealed that no one had observed anything out of the ordinary, and no one seemed to have a clear motive for such a breach. As the days passed, the feeling of violation lingered. My home, once a place of comfort and hospitality, had become a symbol of distrust and intrusion. I took additional measures to enhance security, including installing new surveillance cameras and conducting a thorough sweep of the property for any other hidden devices. The emotional impact of the breach was profound. I struggled with the idea that my home had been compromised and that someone had been privy to my guests' private conversations. The thought of the recordings being listened to by an unknown party was deeply unsettling. It affected my sense of safety and trust in my own space. Despite the investigation, The police struggled to find any leads. The device had been thoroughly examined, but the trail was cold. It was clear that the person responsible had taken great care to avoid detection, leaving behind minimal evidence. The investigation eventually stalled, leaving me with unanswered questions and a lingering sense of unease. In the aftermath, I took steps to rebuild the sense of security and trust. I continued to improve my home security measures and remained vigilant for any signs of further intrusion. I also worked to restore my sense of comfort and safety in my home, even as the memory of the breach continued to cast a shadow. The experience had left me with a deeper awareness of the vulnerabilities we face in our personal spaces. It highlighted the importance of safeguarding privacy and the need for vigilance against potential intrusions. While the immediate threat had been addressed, the emotional impact of the breach served as a constant reminder of the fragility of our sense of security and the lengths to which someone might go to invade it. Story 26. The summer had been particularly hot that year, and I had eagerly looked forward to enjoying some downtime in the comfort of my own home. After a grueling work period, all I wanted was to relax, catch up on my favorite shows, and maybe tackle some home improvement projects. Little did I know that my sanctuary was about to become the center of a deeply unsettling intrusion. It all began on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. I had settled in with a cup of coffee and was preparing to do some work on my laptop. The Wisconsin Fi connection at my house had been a bit spotty lately, so I figured I should check the network settings and see if anything was amiss. I opened the router's admin page, something I'd done many times before, and noticed a few devices connected to my network that I didn't recognize. This was peculiar, but I brushed it off as a minor glitch, or perhaps a neighbor's device that had accidentally connected. Still, I decided to dig a bit deeper just to be sure. I went through the connected devices and found what looked like an unusual list of IP addresses and device names that didn't match any of my personal gadgets. My curiosity piqued. I decided to investigate further, thinking it might be worthwhile to secure my network. Later that day, I noticed something even more alarming. While browsing through my computer, I found an unfamiliar file on my desktop. It was named with a string of random letters and numbers, and it didn't seem to belong to any of the programs or projects I was working on. With a sense of foreboding, I opened the file, hoping it was nothing more than an innocent error. What I saw inside the file left me frozen. It contained a series of logs detailing my internet activity. The logs were organized by date and time, with entries describing websites I had visited, the duration of my visits, and even specific search terms I had used. My heart raced as I realized the extent of the invasion. Someone had been monitoring my online activities in real time and had left evidence of their intrusion on my computer. I reviewed the logs with increasing horror. They detailed everything from routine work-related searches to personal browsing habits, and even private email communications. It was clear that this wasn't just a random or accidental breach, it was a deliberate and systematic invasion of my privacy. The thought of someone watching my every move from behind a screen was deeply unsettling. I immediately started checking for any other signs of tampering or unauthorized access. I scanned my computer for malware and other security threats, but the scans came up clean. It seemed like the intruder had been clever enough to cover their tracks, but the evidence left behind was undeniable. I realized I needed to take immediate action to protect myself and my information. First, I contacted my internet service provider to report the suspicious activity and to inquire about any unusual connections or security breaches on my network. The representative assured me that they would investigate the issue and advised me to change all of my passwords and to secure my Wi-Fi network with a stronger password and updated encryption settings. I also reached out to a local cybersecurity expert who came to my home to assess the situation. They ran a series of diagnostic tests and found that there were indeed unauthorized connections to my network. The expert helped me set up more robust security measures, including a new router with advanced security features, and provided guidance on best practices for maintaining online privacy. In the following days, I felt a constant sense of unease. I was careful about what I shared online and took steps to enhance my digital security. I installed additional antivirus software, used a virtual private network VPN to mask my internet activity, and monitored my network for any further suspicious activity. Despite these precautions, the invasion of my privacy had left me feeling vulnerable and exposed. The investigation by my internet service provider eventually led to the identification of the unauthorized access point. It turned out that someone had been using my Wi-Fi network to carry out their monitoring activities. They had exploited a vulnerability in my network's security to gain access. While the ISP was able to secure my connection and prevent further unauthorized access, the identity of the intruder remained unknown. The experience had a profound impact on me. I had always taken my online privacy for granted, assuming that my network was secure and that my digital activities were private. The intrusion shattered that sense of security and made me acutely aware of the potential risks associated with internet connectivity. As a result of this ordeal, I became more vigilant about my digital security. I regularly updated my passwords, used two-factor authentication where possible, and remained cautious about sharing personal information online. The experience also made me more aware of the importance of safeguarding my home network and ensuring that my digital environment was secure. In the months that followed, I gradually found a sense of normalcy, but the memory of the intrusion lingered. It served as a stark reminder of how vulnerable our personal lives can be in the digital age. The experience also underscored the importance of taking proactive steps to protect one's privacy and to remain vigilant in the face of potential threats. The home that once felt like a safe haven had been violated, and the breach of my privacy had left a lasting impression. Though I had taken steps to secure my network and protect my information, the incident remained a sobering reminder of the need for constant vigilance in an increasingly connected world. Story 27. It started with a small, unsettling detail that I initially brushed off as a minor inconvenience. A few weeks ago, I began to notice that my car seemed to be in slightly different positions in the parking lot when I left work in the evening. It was an unsettling feeling, but I tried to convince myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. After all, I often parked in a large lot with numerous other cars and thought it was possible I was simply misremembering the exact spot. However, the pattern persisted. Over the course of several days, I observed that my car would sometimes be a few spaces away from where I had originally parked it. The first few instances I dismissed as mere coincidences, but the frequency of the occurrences began to make me uneasy. I started to pay closer attention, wondering if there was a logical explanation for the changes. One particularly troubling day, as I was walking toward my car, I noticed that it had been moved from a spot I was certain I had left it in. The car wasn't just a little out of place, it was parked in a completely different row. My anxiety spiked. I scanned the parking lot for anything out of the ordinary but saw nothing that stood out. The feeling of paranoia was growing, and I decided it was time to investigate further. The next day, I arrived at work early and watched the parking lot from a distance, hoping to catch a glimpse of anything unusual. My vigilance paid off. As the morning wore on, I saw a suspicious individual approach my car. The person seemed to be glancing around nervously before getting into my car and driving it a short distance before parking it again in a different spot. I felt a surge of panic. This person was clearly moving my car, but the motivation behind it was unclear. I knew I needed to take action. That evening, I approached my car with a heightened sense of urgency. I wanted to check for any signs of tampering or anything that could explain the strange occurrences. As I inspected the vehicle, I noticed a small, inconspicuous device attached to the underside of the rear bumper. It was a black, cylindrical object with a blinking light. My heart raced as I realized it was a GPS tracker. The discovery of the GPS tracker was both alarming and revealing. I had heard of such devices being used for tracking and surveillance, but I had never imagined I would be a target. I carefully removed the tracker, taking care not to damage it, and inspected it for any identifying marks or information. There was nothing that stood out. It was a standard piece of tracking equipment. My mind raced with questions. Who could have placed this tracker on my car, and why? The unsettling realization that my movements were being monitored left me feeling exposed and vulnerable. I knew I needed to get to the bottom of this, so I took the tracker to the police. The police were attentive and concerned. They took the tracker as evidence and assured me that they would look into the matter. They advised me to be cautious and to report any further suspicious activity. The officer explained that GPS trackers were often used for various purposes, from benign monitoring to more sinister activities. The key was to determine the intent behind the tracking. While the police conducted their investigation, I continued to be vigilant. I installed additional security measures in my car, including a car alarm system with motion sensors. I also began to document any unusual occurrences or changes in my parking situation. The following week, the police informed me that they had analyzed the GPS tracker but had found no direct leads or identifying information about the person who had placed it. They were able to confirm that the device had been used to monitor my movements over a period of time, but beyond that, the trail had gone cold. The lack of progress was frustrating, and the feeling of being watched remained unsettling. I took additional precautions such as varying my routines and parking in different areas when possible. I also reached out to friends and colleagues, sharing my experience in case they noticed anything unusual or had any insights. As time passed, the frequency of the disturbances seemed to decrease. I still occasionally noticed small changes in the parking lot, but they became less frequent. I continued to stay alert, but the initial fear gradually transformed into a more cautious awareness. The experience had left me with a heightened sense of vigilance and a greater appreciation for the importance of personal security. In the end, while the mystery of the GPS tracker was never fully resolved, the ordeal taught me valuable lessons about the need for awareness and preparedness in an increasingly complex world. The knowledge that someone had been monitoring my movements was a stark reminder of the vulnerabilities that come with modern technology and the importance of safeguarding one's privacy. Story 28. It was a chilly autumn afternoon when I decided to tackle the attic. The task had been on my to-do list since I moved into the house several months ago, but between work and settling into my new surroundings, it had been put on the back burner. With the weather turning colder, I figured it was the perfect time to finally clear out the attic and make it usable for storage. The attic was accessed through a narrow, steep staircase that led to a space under the eaves of the house. It was dimly lit by a single overhead bulb, casting a soft glow over the dusty, cluttered expanse. I began by sorting through old furniture, boxes, and miscellaneous items left behind by the previous owner. The dust particles danced in the air as I moved things around, a reminder of how long it had been since anyone had ventured up here. As I pushed aside a stack of old, weathered blankets, I stumbled upon a large, dusty box tucked away in a corner. The box was made of cardboard, its edges worn and frayed from years of neglect. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to open it. I carefully lifted the lid, and a cloud of dust escaped, momentarily obscuring my vision. When it settled, I peered inside. The box was filled with a collection of personal items, old photographs, letters, and keepsakes. The sight was oddly intriguing. The photographs were mostly black and white, capturing moments from decades past. There were pictures of a woman with dark, curly hair and a man who looked like he belonged in the 1940s. They were posed in various settings: garden parties, family gatherings, and what looked like a small wedding. Among the photographs, I found a stack of handwritten letters, yellowed with age. They were neatly folded and tied with a ribbon. The first letter I picked up was addressed to someone named Margaret. The writing was elegant and ornate, the kind of script that spoke of a bygone era. As I read the letter, I learned that it was from someone named Thomas, who seemed to be deeply in love with Margaret. The letter spoke of longing, affection, and a promise of a future together. Intrigued, I continued to read through the letters, each one revealing a different facet of Margaret and Thomas's lives. They spoke of their dreams, their struggles, and their everyday experiences. One letter described a joyous occasion, a birth announcement, and another detailed a period of hardship, with Thomas expressing his frustration at being away from Margaret during a difficult time. In addition to the letters, the box contained several old trinkets, a locket with a photograph inside, a small wooden music box that played a hauntingly beautiful melody, and a set of vintage postcards from various locations. Each item seemed to hold a piece of the past, a snapshot of lives that had once been lived within these very walls. The discovery was both fascinating and eerie. It felt like I had stumbled upon a hidden chapter of the house's history, a narrative that had been long forgotten. I couldn't help but wonder about Margaret and Thomas, who they were, what became of them, and why their belongings were left behind. The next day, I decided to do some research. I visited the local historical society, hoping to uncover more about the people who had once lived in my house. I brought along the photographs and letters, asking if they could help me identify the individuals or provide more context about the time period. The archivist at the Historical Society was intrigued by the items. After some initial research, she was able to confirm that Margaret and Thomas were indeed part of the town's history. They had been well known in the community, with Thomas being a local businessman and Margaret an active participant in various charitable organizations. Their story was one of love and dedication, but it was also marked by personal tragedy. Thomas had died young, leaving Margaret to carry on with a heavy heart. The archivist also revealed that the house had been passed down through several owners after Margaret's time, and it seemed that the box had been forgotten in the attic during one of these transitions. The items had likely remained untouched for decades. Armed with this new information, I returned home with a renewed sense of connection to the past. The discovery of Margaret and Thomas's personal items had transformed my perception of the house. It was no longer just a building, it was a repository of memories and stories that spanned generations. I decided to preserve the items as best as I could. I carefully repackaged the letters and photographs in acid-free materials to prevent further deterioration. The trinkets were cleaned and stored in protective cases. I also placed a small plaque in the attic with a brief note about Margaret and Thomas, acknowledging their place in the history of the house. The attic, once a dusty, forgotten space, had become a tribute to the lives that had come before me. Each time I climbed the stairs, I would look at the box and think of Margaret and Thomas, their lives intertwined with the walls of my home. It was a poignant reminder that every house holds stories within its walls, and sometimes it takes a little digging to uncover the past and honor the memories of those who lived there before. Story 29. The decision to change my phone number came after a series of unwanted calls and messages that had become increasingly intrusive. My old number had been in circulation for years, and over time it seemed to attract more than its fair share of spam and harassment. The tipping point came when I received a particularly unsettling series of texts from an anonymous number, threatening messages that hinted at knowing personal details about my life. It was clear that I needed to cut ties with my old number and start fresh. The process of changing my number was relatively straightforward. I contacted my service provider, explained the situation, and requested a new number. The customer service representative was sympathetic and assured me that my request would be handled promptly. Within a few hours, I had a new number and was ready to move on, believing that this would resolve the issues I had been facing. For the first few days after the switch, everything seemed to be going smoothly. I updated my contacts, notified friends and family, and felt a sense of relief. My old number was disconnected, and I was hopeful that the harassment would stop. However, just as I was beginning to enjoy a sense of normalcy, the new number started receiving texts that were both alarming and menacing. The first message was received within a few hours of activating the new number. It was brief but chilling. "You think changing your number will help? I know where to find you." My heart raced as I read the message. I had expected some adjustment period for notifying contacts, but this immediate response was deeply unsettling. I dismissed it at first, attributing it to coincidence or perhaps a prank, but the messages kept coming. The text grew increasingly threatening and specific. One message detailed a location that I frequented regularly, mentioning that I would not be safe if I continued to visit there. Another message referred to my recent activities, noting my recent purchase at a local store and suggesting that the sender was keeping close tabs on my life. It was as if the person knew my every move, despite having just received my new number. I was filled with a mix of fear and frustration. The fact that someone could obtain my new number almost immediately and use it to harass me was both disconcerting and bewildering. I tried to rationalize the situation, but the repeated, ominous messages left me feeling vulnerable and anxious. I knew I had to take action to protect myself. I began by contacting my phone service provider again, explaining the new situation in detail. I wanted to ensure that my new number had not been inadvertently shared or compromised in some way. The representative assured me that they had taken every precaution to secure my information and that there were no indications of any leaks or breaches on the dish. Next, I reached out to the authorities. I provided them with copies of the threatening texts and explained the entire sequence of events, from the initial harassment on my old number to the new threats. The police took my report seriously and promised to investigate the matter. They advised me to keep records of all communications and to be cautious about sharing any personal information. As the investigation progressed, I took additional steps to protect myself. I changed my passwords and increased security measures for all my online accounts. I also installed a call blocking app to filter out unknown numbers and reduce the chances of receiving further harassment. The app allowed me to report and block suspicious numbers, providing a layer of protection against unwanted communications. Despite these precautions, the harassment continued. The messages became more erratic and desperate, as if the sender was growing frustrated by my attempts to protect myself. The content of the messages started to include personal attacks and threats of physical harm. One message even mentioned a specific date and time, suggesting that the sender had been monitoring my schedule closely. The constant barrage of threatening texts took a toll on my mental well-being. I became hyper-vigilant, avoiding places I used to frequent and constantly scanning my surroundings for any sign of danger. My sense of security was shattered, and I struggled to maintain a normal routine amidst the fear and anxiety. Throughout this period, I received periodic updates from the authorities. They were diligently working to trace the source of the messages, but the anonymity of the sender and the use of various communication methods made it a challenging task. The investigation involved analyzing patterns in the messages, tracking the sources of the texts, and attempting to uncover any leads that might reveal the identity of the harasser. As the months went by, the intensity of the messages gradually decreased. They became less frequent and less threatening, eventually tapering off altogether. The relief of not receiving constant harassment was significant, but the experience had left lasting effects. The ordeal had made me more cautious and wary of sharing personal information, and the fear of being watched or tracked lingered. Eventually, the authorities were able to identify and apprehend a suspect. The individual turned out to be someone with a history of similar offenses, and the investigation revealed that they had used various methods to obtain and exploit personal information. The closure of the case brought a sense of justice, but the emotional scars remained. The experience taught me valuable lessons about digital privacy, security, and resilience. While the harassment had been deeply unsettling, it reinforced the importance of being vigilant and proactive in safeguarding personal information. The ordeal also highlighted the need for strong support systems and professional help when dealing with such invasive threats. In the end, while the immediate danger had passed, the experience served as a reminder of the vulnerabilities we face in an increasingly connected world. It reinforced the importance of remaining vigilant and prepared to address any threats to personal safety and privacy. Story 30. The days following my surgery should have been a time of recovery and healing, but instead they quickly descended into a labyrinth of confusion and concern. The surgery itself had been routine, a minor procedure that was supposed to alleviate a long-standing issue. The hospital staff had been professional and reassuring, and I was confident that everything would go smoothly. The first few days after I was discharged were spent in the comfort of my home. I followed the post-operative care instructions meticulously, taking my medications and attending follow-up appointments as scheduled. Everything seemed to be progressing normally until I received an unexpected phone call from my primary care physician's office. The call came on a Wednesday afternoon, just as I was preparing to take a nap. The nurse on the other end of the line sounded unusually concerned. "We've noticed some discrepancies in your medical records," she said. "It seems there have been some changes to your treatment plan that don't align with what was discussed. Can you come in for a review?" Puzzled and slightly alarmed, I agreed to come in. I had always trusted my medical team and found it hard to believe that anything could be amiss. However, the urgency in the nurse's voice left me feeling uneasy. When I arrived at the clinic, I was greeted by Dr. Adams, my primary care physician. He was usually calm and composed, but today he seemed unusually tense. We sat down in his office, and he began to explain the situation. "After reviewing your records, we've discovered that several of your medical files have been altered. Changes were made to your medication list and treatment plan, and some of the notes from your surgery are missing or incorrect." I was taken aback. "What do you mean altered? How could this happen?" Dr. Adams continued, "It's unclear at this point, but it appears that someone may have tampered with your records. The changes are concerning and don't match the original treatment plan. For example, there are discrepancies in the medication dosages and instructions that weren't authorized by your surgical team." The realization hit me like a wave. If someone had tampered with my medical records, it could have serious implications for my health. I thought back to the days since the surgery. Though I had followed all the instructions, I had been experiencing unusual side effects and symptoms that didn't quite fit with what I had been told to expect. Dr. Adams suggested we conduct a thorough review of my treatment history and update my records accordingly. He also recommended that I undergo additional tests to ensure that the tampering hadn't affected my recovery. The following days were a whirlwind of appointments, tests, and consultations. I underwent a series of diagnostic procedures to assess the impact of the altered records on my health. Each test was followed by consultations with specialists who reviewed my updated records and tried to piece together what had gone wrong. During this process, I learned that the changes made to my records were not just minor errors, they had altered key aspects of my treatment plan. Medications I was supposed to be taking were listed incorrectly, and some follow-up treatments had been misrepresented. It became clear that the tampering had the potential to derail my recovery. The investigation into how the records were altered was equally distressing. The hospital's administrative team conducted a thorough audit of their systems. It was discovered that someone with access to the hospital's electronic medical records system had manipulated my files. The breach appeared to be a deliberate act, but the motive remained unclear. As I dealt with the fallout from the tampering, I found myself grappling with a mixture of emotions. There was fear and frustration about the potential impact on my health, but also a profound sense of violation. My medical records, which should have been a secure and private part of my life, had been compromised. The hospital took steps to rectify the situation. They corrected the discrepancies in my records and ensured that I received the appropriate treatments moving forward. They also implemented additional security measures to prevent similar incidents from occurring in the future. I was reassured that every possible precaution was being taken to protect patient information. Despite these efforts, the experience left me deeply unsettled. The trust I had once placed in the medical system was shaken. I found myself questioning the integrity of the systems designed to safeguard my health and the security of my personal information. In the weeks that followed, I continued my recovery, but the shadow of the incident lingered. Each appointment, each new test was accompanied by a heightened sense of vigilance. I had to remind myself to focus on my recovery while also remaining aware of the potential risks to my health. The investigation eventually led to the identification of the individual responsible for the tampering. They were a hospital employee who had acted out of a misguided sense of authority, believing they were making changes for the better. The employee faced disciplinary actions and legal consequences, and the hospital made a public statement about the incident, apologizing to affected patients and reinforcing their commitment to data security. As I moved forward, I took steps to advocate for greater transparency and accountability in healthcare settings. I became involved in discussions about patient privacy and the importance of robust security measures. My experience had underscored the need for vigilance and reform in protecting sensitive personal information. Though the immediate threat had been addressed and my medical records were corrected, the incident had a lasting impact on me. It served as a reminder of the fragility of privacy and the importance of safeguarding personal information. My journey to recovery was marked by a new awareness of the systems and safeguards that are meant to protect us, and a renewed commitment to ensuring that such breaches do not happen to others. Story 31. It was a rainy Tuesday evening when my phone rang, its shrill tone cutting through the quiet of my living room. I was settled in with a book, enjoying the soft patter of rain against the windows, when the call interrupted my solitude. I glanced at the screen, noting an unfamiliar number. Hesitant but curious, I answered. The voice on the other end was muffled and distorted, almost as if it were coming through a poor quality speaker or being deliberately obscured. The person spoke in a calm but unsettling tone. "I have information about your family," the voice said. The words were disjointed, as if the speaker was trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy while concealing their true intentions. I asked for more details, but the caller remained vague. They mentioned that they had been following my family's activities for some time and knew certain details that would be troubling if I weren't careful. My heart began to race as I processed the implications of the call. The lack of clarity regarding the caller's identity and motives left me feeling unsettled and apprehensive. I pressed for more information, trying to gauge whether this was a prank or something more sinister. The voice on the other end provided a few specific details about my parents' recent medical appointments, my brother's job situation, and even some private matters that only a close observer would know. The information was accurate, and this only heightened my sense of dread. "Why are you telling me this?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. The caller responded with a cryptic message. "It's in your best interest to know what I know. You need to be cautious. They're watching." The call ended abruptly, leaving me with a mix of confusion and fear. The phone went silent, and I was left staring at the device, trying to make sense of the conversation. The first thing I did was contact my family. I reached out to my parents and brother, informing them of the strange call and sharing the details. They were concerned but reassured me that they hadn't noticed anything out of the ordinary in their daily lives. Despite their calm reassurances, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I decided to take precautions and contacted the local authorities. I reported the call, provided the details I had, and requested their assistance in investigating the matter. They took down the information and promised to look into it, but I was aware that finding the caller would be a daunting task without any concrete leads. While waiting for the police to make progress, I became increasingly vigilant about my family's safety. I monitored their routines more closely and took extra security measures around our homes. I even hired a private investigator to conduct a background check on any potential threats or suspicious activities that might be connected to the call. The weeks that followed were fraught with tension. I received no further calls, but the uncertainty lingered. I scrutinized every odd occurrence, from unexpected visitors to changes in routine, and remained hyper-aware of my surroundings. The fear that someone might be watching or monitoring us in the background was a constant source of anxiety. During this period, I noticed a pattern of unusual behavior from some acquaintances and even a few strangers who seemed to show a heightened interest in my family's activities. I began to question whether these encounters were related to the mysterious call, or if my paranoia was simply making me more aware of the normal ebb and flow of daily life. Despite my vigilance, the authorities and private investigator were unable to provide any significant leads. The caller had not made any further contact, and no substantial evidence was uncovered linking anyone to the unsettling message. The case seemed to have reached a dead end, leaving me feeling frustrated and helpless. One evening, after months of living in a state of heightened alert, I received another call. This time, the voice was clearer, though still partially obscured. The caller repeated their earlier warnings, but now their tone carried an ominous edge. "You should have heeded my warnings," the voice said. "Things are about to change." The call ended as abruptly as it had started, and I was left once again grappling with a sense of unease. I tried to remain rational, but the repeated, cryptic messages were beginning to take a toll on my mental state. I found myself constantly second-guessing every interaction and scrutinizing every detail of my family's lives. Determined to regain a sense of normalcy, I continued to follow the precautions I had implemented and maintained close communication with the authorities. The fear of the unknown had become a part of my daily life, but I resolved not to let it control me. Months passed, and while the unsettling calls eventually ceased, the experience left a lasting impact on me and my family. We became more aware of our personal security and developed a heightened sense of vigilance. The mysterious caller and their motives remained an enigma, but the ordeal served as a stark reminder of the importance of protecting one's privacy and remaining cautious in the face of uncertainty. Though the investigation yielded no definitive answers, the experience taught me the value of resilience and the need to stay alert even when faced with ambiguity. The haunting message from the mysterious caller continued to serve as a reminder of the fragile boundary between safety and vulnerability, and the need to be ever vigilant in safeguarding our lives from unseen threats. Story 32. It started as a routine day, with the sun casting its warm, comforting rays through my window. I was sipping my coffee and checking my social media feeds when I noticed something odd. There were notifications from several friends and family members asking if I was okay and expressing concern over some recent messages they had received from me. Initially, I brushed it off as a miscommunication or a prank, but the growing number of inquiries made me uneasy. I logged into my accounts and was immediately struck by a sense of dread. My social media pages were littered with posts and messages that I hadn't authored. The content ranged from alarming to downright threatening. One message on Facebook reads, "Stay away from me or you'll regret it." Another, directed at a close friend, accused them of betrayal and warned them to keep their distance. The messages were filled with hostility and malice, completely out of character for me. Panic set in as I realized the gravity of the situation. I immediately began checking my other accounts' email, messaging apps, and even my bank accounts. Each one revealed the same disturbing pattern: unauthorized activity and messages that I hadn't sent. My email contained aggressive and threatening emails directed at people I cared about. Some accounts had even been used to make alarming changes, such as sending false financial information to my contacts. The realization that someone had gained access to my online accounts and was using them to send threatening messages was deeply unsettling. I felt violated and powerless, struggling to comprehend how someone could so easily exploit my personal information. My first step was to secure my accounts. I changed all my passwords immediately and enabled two-factor authentication to add an extra layer of security. Despite these efforts, the damage had already been done, and the emotional toll was considerable. I contacted my friends and family to explain the situation, apologizing for the distress caused by the messages. The reaction was a mixture of concern and confusion, as they struggled to understand how I could have sent such hostile communications. I reassured them that my accounts had been compromised, and that I was taking steps to address the issue. They were supportive, but the incident had clearly left a mark, and some relationships were strained by the unwarranted hostility. Next, I reached out to the support teams of the various platforms where my accounts had been compromised. The process of reporting the unauthorized access and recovering my accounts was tedious and stressful. I provided detailed information about the suspicious activity and worked with the support teams to secure my accounts and investigate the breaches. The responses were helpful but slow, and I had to wait anxiously for updates while trying to manage the fallout. In parallel, I contacted the local authorities to report the hacking and the threatening messages. The police took my report seriously and began an investigation. They advised me to keep records of all the unauthorized activity and threatening communications, as it could be crucial for identifying the perpetrator. The investigation added another layer of stress, as I felt both vulnerable and frustrated by the lack of immediate answers. As days turned into weeks, the sense of violation and anxiety persisted. The experience had left me feeling exposed and deeply shaken. I struggled to regain a sense of normalcy, constantly worrying about the possibility of further attacks or additional damage. I was hesitant to use my accounts or engage with my online community, fearing that the hacker might still be active or that the situation could escalate further. The emotional impact of the hacking was significant. I experienced anxiety and sleepless nights, and the constant worry about the security of my personal information took a toll on my mental health. I sought support from a therapist to help process the trauma and regain a sense of control. The therapy sessions provided valuable coping strategies and a safe space to discuss my fears and anxieties. Meanwhile, the investigation into the hacking continued. The authorities and platform support teams worked diligently to uncover the source of the breach. It became apparent that the attacker had used sophisticated methods to gain access to my accounts, including phishing schemes and stolen credentials. Although the investigation did not immediately lead to the identification of the perpetrator, the support teams provided guidance on improving my security practices to prevent future incidents. Over time, the threatening messages ceased, and my accounts were gradually restored to their original state. The recovery process was slow, but I began to regain a sense of control and security. I took proactive measures to enhance my online privacy, such as regularly updating passwords, monitoring my accounts for unusual activity, and being cautious about sharing personal information. The experience also prompted me to become more educated about cybersecurity and online safety. I attended workshops and read extensively about best practices for protecting personal information. I learned to recognize phishing attempts and other common tactics used by cybercriminals, and I shared this knowledge with friends and family to help them stay safe. While the hacking incident was a harrowing experience, it ultimately served as a powerful reminder of the importance of digital security and personal privacy. The ordeal reshaped my understanding of online risks and the measures needed to safeguard oneself in an increasingly connected world. The journey from violation to recovery was challenging, but it underscored the resilience and vigilance required to protect one's digital life in a world where online threats are all too real. Story 33. It was a routine Tuesday morning when I first heard the voicemail. I was busy preparing for work, juggling a cup of coffee and my phone while trying to get out the door on time. The voicemail alert was buried beneath the usual stream of notifications, but something about it caught my attention. The message was from an unknown number, and I hesitated before pressing play. The voicemail began with a cold, unsteady voice that sent shivers down my spine. "I know your routine," the voice said. "I see you leave for work every morning at 7:15. You stop by the coffee shop on Elm Street, and then you head to your office building." The details were precise and unsettling. The voice continued, "You think you're so predictable. If you don't start paying attention, things are going to change, and not for the better." I felt a wave of nausea wash over me as I listened. The voicemail included details about my daily habits, from my morning coffee stop to my work schedule. It felt like a violation of my personal space, an intrusion that went beyond mere annoyance. The message ended abruptly with a warning that left me feeling both vulnerable and frightened. In a state of shock, I replayed the voicemail, trying to grasp the full extent of what I had heard. The knowledge that someone had been tracking my daily routine was deeply disturbing. My first instinct was to contact the authorities, but I felt paralyzed by the fear of not knowing who was behind the threat or how serious it might be. After taking a deep breath and steadying myself, I dialed the local police department. I explained the situation, providing them with the voicemail and any details I could recall about my routine that had been mentioned. The officers were sympathetic, but noted that while the voicemail was concerning, they needed more concrete evidence to take immediate action. They advised me to document any further suspicious activity and to be extra cautious. In the days that followed, I tried to maintain a sense of normalcy, but the threat loomed large in my mind. I changed my routine as much as possible, varying the times I left for work and the routes I took. I also avoided going to the coffee shop on Elm Street, opting for different locations to throw off any potential surveillance. Despite these changes, the sense of being watched never fully left me. I started to notice subtle changes in my surroundings. On a couple of occasions, I spotted someone lingering near my apartment building, though I could never get a clear look at them. I was constantly on edge, feeling as though my every move was being scrutinized. My anxiety began to affect other areas of my life, making it difficult to focus at work and enjoy time with friends and family. Concerned for my safety, I installed additional security measures at home. I bought motion-activated lights and a security camera system, hoping these would provide some level of protection and peace of mind. I also made a point to vary my daily routine further, avoiding predictable patterns and being cautious about my personal information. Despite these efforts, the voicemail seemed to have set off a series of unsettling events. I received more mysterious phone calls from blocked numbers, though they were silent and didn't provide any additional information. The calls felt like a constant reminder of the threat that had been made. I continued to report these incidents to the police, but they struggled to trace the source of the calls or the initial voicemail. One evening, as I was reviewing security footage from my camera system, I noticed something troubling. A figure was captured walking near my building wearing a hooded sweatshirt that obscured their face. They didn't appear to approach my apartment directly, but their presence in the footage was enough to heighten my sense of fear. I shared the footage with the police, who assured me they would investigate, but the progress was slow. The situation reached a turning point when one night I received a text message from an unknown number. The message was brief but chilling. "You're not as careful as you think. I know where you live." It was a stark reminder that the threat was ongoing, and that whoever was behind it was intent on maintaining their intimidation. I began to take extra precautions, including staying with friends or family on nights when I felt particularly anxious. I also sought support from a counselor, hoping to manage the emotional impact of the situation and regain some control over my life. The counselor helped me navigate my feelings of fear and anxiety, offering strategies to cope with the stress and maintain a sense of safety. As time passed, the intensity of the threat seemed to diminish. The police were able to trace the source of some of the harassing calls to a local number, but it turned out to be a dead end, as the person responsible was not easily identifiable. The voicemail and text messages stopped coming, and while the fear didn't vanish entirely, there was a sense of relief that the immediate danger seemed to have receded. The experience had left a lasting impact on me. I remained vigilant and cautious, aware of the potential for privacy violations and the importance of safeguarding personal information. The ordeal had taught me the value of resilience and the importance of taking proactive measures to protect oneself. Though the immediate threat had been addressed, the psychological effects lingered. I continued to work on rebuilding my sense of security and trust, knowing that the experience had changed my perspective on personal safety and privacy. The journey from fear to recovery was gradual, but it was a testament to the strength and support that helped me navigate the unsettling situation. Story 34. It began on an ordinary Saturday morning. I had just finished my coffee and was preparing to head out for a run when I spotted an envelope sticking out of my mailbox. It was an unremarkable, plain white envelope with no return address, just my name written in an unfamiliar, spidery handwriting. My curiosity got the better of me, so I brought it inside and opened it, expecting perhaps a misplaced letter or some marketing material. Instead, I found a series of documents that left me feeling cold and unsettled. The first sheet was a detailed blueprint of my home, showing every room, every door, and even the layout of my backyard. It wasn't just a generic floor plan, it had specific notes scribbled in the margins about various parts of the house, like weak spot near the back door and frequent visits to the home office. I turned the page, and my heart sank as I saw detailed maps of my neighborhood, highlighting various houses, including mine, with circles and arrows marking different locations. Alongside the maps and plans were cryptic notes detailing my daily schedule. They mentioned my usual wake-up time, my routine of going to the gym, my weekly grocery shopping trips, and even the times I usually met friends or worked from home. It was as if someone had been meticulously tracking my every move. I felt a rush of panic. My first instinct was to check the security of my home. I ran around, checking all doors and windows, ensuring everything was locked and in place. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but the sense of violation was overwhelming. I had always prided myself on being cautious and vigilant, but this was beyond anything I had anticipated. Trying to stay calm, I decided to document everything. I took photographs of the plans and notes and made copies for my records. The more I examined the documents, the more I realized the depth of the invasion. The plans included not just my home, but detailed notes on my neighbors as well, suggesting that whoever was behind this had been observing not just me, but the entire area. I immediately contacted the police and provided them with all the evidence I had gathered. The officer who arrived was serious and attentive, taking detailed notes and asking questions about any recent interactions or disputes that could have led to such an invasion. I explained that I had no idea who could be behind this, but I was deeply concerned for my safety. The police began an investigation, but progress was slow. They ran checks on the documents and explored potential suspects, but the nature of the materials made it difficult to trace any leads. The maps and notes didn't provide any clear clues about the identity of the sender, and the investigation seemed to stall. Feeling increasingly anxious, I decided to take additional precautions. I installed extra security cameras around my home and hired a security service to conduct regular patrols in the neighborhood. I also began to vary my daily routine, hoping to throw off anyone who might be tracking my movements. Despite these measures, the sense of dread remained. Each day I would check my mailbox with trepidation, fearing another unsettling envelope. My vigilance paid off when 2 weeks later I received another letter. This one was different. It was a single sheet of paper with a simple message: "You're being watched. Stay alert." The note did nothing to alleviate my fear, but did make me more determined to find out who was behind the surveillance. I continued to work with the police and shared the new letter with them. They advised me to be cautious and assured me that they were doing everything they could to track down the perpetrator. In the meantime, I reached out to my neighbors, informing them of the situation and urging them to be vigilant. I learned that none of them had received any suspicious letters, but they all agreed to keep an eye out for anything unusual. The investigation continued, and while the police followed leads and conducted interviews, they struggled to make significant progress. The lack of direct evidence and the anonymous nature of the letters made it a challenging case. I tried to stay patient, but the constant worry took a toll on my mental well-being. One day, a breakthrough came when a neighbor reported seeing someone acting suspiciously near the mailboxes. The description given matched that of a local handyman who had done work in the neighborhood several months earlier. The police followed up on this lead and discovered that the handyman had been using his knowledge of the area to conduct surveillance. As the investigation unfolded, it was revealed that the handyman had been hired by someone who had a personal vendetta against me. The motive was rooted in a dispute over a property issue that had occurred years ago, long before I had even moved to the area. The handyman had been hired to gather information and intimidate me, but his actions had gone far beyond what was expected. The authorities were able to apprehend him, and he confessed to the surveillance and the delivery of the letters. The individual who had hired him was also identified and faced legal consequences for orchestrating the harassment. The case brought a sense of relief, though the experience had left a lasting impact on me. In the aftermath, I took steps to ensure that my home and personal security were reinforced. I continued to stay vigilant and proactive, knowing that the experience had taught me valuable lessons about privacy and safety. The ordeal was a stark reminder of how easily one's sense of security can be compromised and how important it is to take swift action when faced with such invasions. The letters had stopped, and the surveillance had ceased, but the impact of the experience lingered. I remained cautious but found solace in the fact that the situation had been resolved and that I could once again feel secure in my own home. Story 35. The evening had started off pleasantly enough. I had been invited to a friend's house for a casual get-together. We had known each other for years, and their home was always a welcoming space filled with laughter and good company. This visit was no different. There were appetizers on the table, soft music playing in the background, and a relaxed atmosphere that made for an enjoyable evening. We spent the first few hours chatting, catching up on life, and sharing stories. The conversation flowed easily, and we all seemed to be having a great time. My friend Mark had recently upgraded his home with a new security system, and he proudly showed it off during our conversation. The system included cameras that monitored various parts of the house and could be accessed remotely through an app. Mark mentioned how it gave him peace of mind, knowing he could keep an eye on things even when he wasn't home. As the evening went on, I noticed that the conversation shifted to more personal topics, and Mark's wife, Lisa, seemed particularly enthusiastic about showing off the new system's features. She was demonstrating how they could view live footage from different rooms on their phones and tablets. It was clear that Mark and Lisa were quite proud of their new setup, and they seemed eager to showcase its capabilities to their guests. The party continued with no hint of anything amiss. We played games, enjoyed a delicious meal, and shared more laughs. As I left their house later that evening, I thanked them for the wonderful time and headed home, feeling content and relaxed. It wasn't until the following morning that things took a disturbing turn. I had just started my day when I received an alert on my phone. It was a notification from a social media platform with a message that seemed out of place. The message contained a link, accompanied by a brief description. Watch the latest live footage from Mark's house. Looks like the party was a blast. Confused, I clicked the link, half expecting it to be a joke or some sort of prank, but what I saw made my blood run cold. The link led to a live stream of footage from what appeared to be multiple cameras inside Mark's house. The feed was not only live, but also showed various parts of the house, including the areas where we had been socializing the previous evening. The realization that I was watching footage from a private gathering was deeply unsettling. I immediately tried to contact Mark, but his phone went straight to voicemail. My heart raced as I considered the implications. If the footage was being streamed online, it meant that someone had gained unauthorized access to Mark's security system. The idea that our conversations and interactions from the night before were now public was horrifying. Feeling an urgent need to alert Mark and Lisa, I decided to drive back to their house. When I arrived, Mark was outside, looking visibly distressed. He had been frantically trying to get his system back under control, but had been unable to do so. The look on his face confirmed my worst fears. His home security system had indeed been compromised, and the footage of our evening was being streamed online. Mark and Lisa were both in shock. They had no idea how their security system had been hacked or how the footage had been made available to the public. The realization that their private moments had been exposed in such a manner was deeply disturbing. Mark showed me the control panel in the app, which had been overtaken by an unknown party. The app displayed a warning that it had been hacked, and the live stream was still active. We contacted a cybersecurity expert who arrived quickly to assess the situation. The expert was able to confirm that the system had been breached through a vulnerability in the software. The hacker had gained access to the cameras and had redirected the live feed to various online platforms. The expert began working to shut down the unauthorized access and secure the system. While the cybersecurity expert worked, Mark and Lisa tried to mitigate the damage by removing the live stream and contacting the authorities. The police arrived soon after and took note of the incident, documenting the breach and beginning their investigation. They were able to trace the source of the hack to an IP address, but were uncertain about the identity of the perpetrator. The aftermath of the incident left a lasting impact on all of us. The breach of privacy was profound, and the feeling of being watched and exposed was deeply unsettling. Mark and Lisa had to navigate the fallout, including dealing with the online exposure of their private moments and taking steps to prevent future breaches. They also had to work with their security provider to ensure that their system was fully secure and that any vulnerabilities were addressed. In the weeks that followed, Mark and Lisa took additional precautions to safeguard their home and personal information. They replaced their security system with a more secure model and implemented stricter access controls. They also worked with the authorities and cybersecurity experts to track down the hacker, although the investigation faced numerous challenges due to the complexity of cybercrime. The experience had a profound effect on me as well. The invasion of privacy and the exposure of our personal moments served as a stark reminder of the vulnerabilities inherent in modern technology. It highlighted the importance of vigilance and the need to ensure that our digital systems are secure. Ultimately, the incident served as a sobering lesson about the potential risks associated with connected devices and the importance of safeguarding our privacy. The breach had exposed not just our private moments, but also the broader vulnerabilities in the digital landscape. It reinforced the need for ongoing awareness and proactive measures to protect ourselves from such invasions in the future. Story 36. I had always cherished the tranquility of living alone in my small apartment. The space was a reflection of my personality, filled with memories from my travels, cherished books, and the comforting familiarity of my daily routines. It was my haven from the world, a place where I could relax and be myself without the intrusion of others. But that sense of security was shattered in ways I couldn't have imagined. It began subtly. At first, I thought it was just my imagination. I noticed that things were slightly out of place. My favorite mug, which I always left on the kitchen counter, was found in the living room. My bookshelves had been rearranged, and a few items on my desk seemed to have been shifted. I tried to brush it off as a result of my own absent-mindedness or maybe a little chaos from my busy lifestyle. However, the disturbances continued. I started finding items in odd places, like my car keys in the fridge or my wallet on the bathroom sink. It was as if someone was coming into my apartment and moving things around. Though I was always alone when I came home, I checked and rechecked my locks, convinced I was just being overly paranoid. The thought that someone could be accessing my apartment without my knowledge was unsettling. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, I noticed a new pattern in the disturbances. The front door, which I always locked behind me, seemed to be left slightly ajar. I double-checked the lock, making sure it was secure, and dismissed it as a mere oversight on my part. Yet the feeling of unease lingered. That night, I lay in bed with my mind racing, unable to shake the thought that someone might be entering my apartment while I was out. A few days later, I came home to find something even more alarming. My bedroom door, which I always kept closed, was slightly open. I was certain I had closed it before leaving. Inside, I discovered that my personal belongings had been rifled through drawers that were once neatly organized now looked haphazardly opened, and some items seemed to be misplaced. My heart pounded as I surveyed the room, trying to make sense of what was happening. I had no idea who could be doing this or how they were gaining access. Determined to get to the bottom of it, I decided to take precautions. I started locking my bedroom door when I wasn't home and made sure to double-check all windows and doors before leaving. I also set up a small camera in my living room to monitor any unusual activity. I hoped that having some sort of surveillance would give me answers and hopefully catch whoever was intruding. The first night the camera recorded was uneventful. I reviewed the footage with a sense of anticipation, hoping to find some clue or explanation. To my dismay, the footage showed nothing out of the ordinary, just the usual scenes of my empty apartment. The camera didn't capture any signs of someone entering or leaving the apartment. The following days were a blur of tension and anxiety. Every time I came home, I checked the camera footage and inspected my belongings, looking for any indication of a break-in. The disturbances continued, though they became more erratic. Sometimes things would be moved around. Other times, everything would appear untouched. It was as though the intruder was deliberately taunting me, leaving just enough evidence to unsettle me but never enough to provide clear answers. One evening, as I was going through the camera footage, I noticed something strange. There was a brief flicker of movement just before the camera went dark for a few seconds. It was subtle but noticeable. I replayed the footage, trying to determine what had caused the disruption. I zoomed in on the area where the flicker occurred and noticed a shadowy figure moving quickly past the camera's field of view. The sight of the shadowy figure sent a chill down my spine. It was clear that someone had been entering my apartment, though their presence was fleeting and difficult to discern. The brief flicker of movement was enough to confirm my fears someone had been intruding, but they were careful to avoid being captured clearly on camera. I decided to take immediate action. I contacted the landlord to report the situation and requested that they check the security of the building. I also sought advice from local authorities, providing them with the footage and details of the disturbances. The police took my report seriously and promised to investigate, though they advised me to continue with my security measures and to be cautious. In the meantime, I took extra precautions. I changed all my locks, installed a more advanced security system, and added additional cameras to cover blind spots in my apartment. I also started keeping a log of any unusual occurrences, hoping that documenting everything would help the authorities in their investigation. Despite these efforts, the disturbances persisted, though they became less frequent over time. The sense of being watched and the feeling of my personal space being violated never fully dissipated. The police investigation didn't yield any conclusive results, and the identity of the intruder remained unknown. The experience left a lasting impact on me. My apartment, once a sanctuary, became a source of anxiety and distrust. I learned to be more vigilant about my security and to take steps to protect my privacy. The ordeal also made me realize how easily one's sense of safety could be shattered by the intrusion of others. As time passed, I gradually found ways to reclaim my sense of security. I continued to monitor my apartment with the security system and remained cautious about any changes in my environment. While the memory of the intrusion lingered, I learned to adapt and remain vigilant, understanding the importance of safeguarding my personal space and maintaining a sense of control over my own home. Story 37. It was an ordinary Tuesday afternoon when the first letter arrived. I was in the middle of preparing dinner, the smell of garlic and herbs filling the kitchen, when I heard the soft thud of mail hitting the floor. I retrieved it from the entryway, a handful of envelopes and a small parcel. Among the usual bills and advertisements, one envelope stood out. It was plain, unmarked, and lacked a return address. A sense of unease flickered through me, but I dismissed it as an unremarkable piece of junk mail. Later that evening, curiosity got the better of me. I opened the envelope to find a single sheet of paper with a typed message. It read, "I see everything you do. You're never alone." The message was disquieting, but I initially chalked it up to a prank or a misguided attempt at humor. I crumpled the note and tossed it aside, deciding it wasn't worth losing sleep over. The next day brought more mail. As I sifted through the pile, I found another envelope, this time with a photo inside. The photo was taken from a distance, but it clearly showed my house. In the image, my front yard was visible, and the photograph was dated from a week earlier. The accompanying note was handwritten and read, "I've been watching you for a while. Nice garden." My heart raced as I processed the implications. This was not just a random prank. Someone had been observing my home and taking the time to send me unsettling messages. I took the photo and note to the police, hoping for some answers. They assured me that they would look into it, but warned me that without more evidence, it would be difficult to track down the sender. Despite the police's efforts, the unsettling mail continued to arrive. Each letter was more disturbing than the last. The next envelope contained a series of photographs showing me leaving my house at various times of the day. They were taken from angles that suggested someone had been shadowing me. The accompanying note read, "I know your routines. It's fascinating to see how predictable you are." The feeling of being watched grew more intense. I found myself second-guessing every movement and being hyper-aware of my surroundings. I changed my routines, varied my schedule, I even parked in different spots, hoping to throw off whoever was tracking me. But the mail kept coming. One envelope contained a collage of images. It included photographs of my work, my favorite coffee shop, and even a picture of me at a local park with a group of friends. Each image was annotated with comments that described moments of my life with unnerving precision. The note with the collage was chilling. "I enjoy your company. You have no idea how much I know about you." Feeling increasingly paranoid, I began to scrutinize every detail of my life for potential vulnerabilities. I checked my home security system, ensured that my car was locked and alarmed, and began documenting the incoming mail with meticulous detail. I even installed additional locks on doors and windows, hoping to create a sense of security in the midst of the growing paranoia. The police investigation continued, but progress was slow. They managed to trace some of the mail to a local post office, but found no leads that pointed to the sender's identity. They advised me to keep up with my security measures and to report any further suspicious activity immediately. The intrusion continued with a letter that arrived a few days later. This time it was not just a note, but a disturbing video. It was a grainy recording showing me asleep in my bedroom. The video was clearly taken from a distance, and the sight of myself in such a vulnerable state was deeply unsettling. The note accompanying the video simply said, "I'm always watching." I felt a mixture of fear and anger. The intrusion into my personal space, the constant surveillance, and the lack of any clear motive made me feel like my life was being invaded from all sides. I increased the security measures around my home, installed motion sensor lights, and even hired a private security firm to monitor the area. The experience took a toll on my mental health. I became withdrawn, avoiding social interactions and spending most of my time at home, where I felt the safest. The constant fear of someone watching my every move left me exhausted and anxious. I sought therapy to help cope with the stress and anxiety, and it was a relief to have someone to talk to about the ongoing ordeal. Weeks passed, and the frequency of the disturbing mail began to decrease. The last few pieces of mail were less threatening, consisting of vague notes with generic messages. It seemed as though the sender was either losing interest or becoming more cautious. The police continued to investigate, but the case remained open and unsolved. The experience left a lasting impact on my sense of security. While the immediate threat subsided, the fear of being watched lingered. I remained vigilant about my personal safety and continued to be cautious about sharing personal information. The ordeal had transformed my perception of privacy and the lengths to which someone might go to invade it. In the end, the mystery of the disturbing messages and images was never fully resolved. The unsettling knowledge that someone had been so closely monitoring my life remained a dark shadow over my sense of security. I learned the hard way the importance of safeguarding personal information and the impact that privacy invasions can have on one's life. Story 38. It started with a phone call that came late at night, just as I was about to settle into bed. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, and when I answered, there was only silence on the other end. I thought it was probably a wrong number or a telemarketer and decided to ignore it. The next night, the same number called again. This time I let it ring out. By the third call, I was beginning to feel uneasy. When I finally answered, a chill ran down my spine. A distorted voice, barely recognizable as human, spoke on the other end. "I know your darkest secrets," the voice rasped, "and I'll make sure everyone else does too unless you follow my instructions." I was stunned. My mind raced through various possibilities: pranks, mistaken identity, or even someone trying to scare me for no reason. The voice didn't give me much time to react before hanging up abruptly. I tried to rationalize the situation, convincing myself it was a prank or an attempt at intimidation. But as the days went by, the calls continued, each one more unnerving than the last. The voice became increasingly specific. It would mention things about my life that I had never shared with anyone. Things that made me wonder how someone could know so much about me. They knew about my failed relationship with my ex, the issues I'd been having at work, and even my personal insecurities. Each call was accompanied by a demand, sometimes trivial, other times unsettling. The first demand was simple: meet me at the old bridge at midnight and bring $200. I was hesitant, but thought it best to comply. I didn't want to risk escalating the situation, so I went to the meeting point, only to find no one there. The call came through again once I was back home, taunting me about my failure to meet the terms. The voice threatened that if I didn't comply next time, the consequences would be severe. The following days were a blur of anxiety. I felt like I was constantly being watched. My every move seemed scrutinized, and I became hyper-aware of my surroundings. The calls continued, each one delivering more specific threats and demands. I started receiving instructions to perform increasingly bizarre tasks, such as leaving a package at a certain location or making small, seemingly innocuous purchases. One evening, I received a call that was different from the rest. The voice was quieter, almost sympathetic, and it said, "I know this is hard, but it's the only way. You have to keep following my instructions or your secrets will be exposed." The call ended with a chilling reminder: remember, I'm always watching. Determined to put an end to the torment, I decided to contact the authorities. I reported the calls, and the police took the matter seriously. They traced the number to a disposable phone and promised to investigate further. They advised me to document every call, every threat, and every interaction to build a case against the anonymous tormentor. As the weeks passed, the calls became less frequent, but the anxiety remained. I was constantly on edge, second-guessing every decision and interaction. I changed my routines, avoided places where I might be recognized, and took extra precautions to protect my privacy. One day, while reviewing the documentation I had compiled, I noticed a pattern in the calls. The demands and threats were following a timeline that seemed linked to specific events in my life. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. The person behind the calls was not just targeting me at random. They had access to my personal history and were using it to manipulate and control me. With this new insight, I went back to the police and shared my observations. They brought in a behavioral analyst to help profile the caller and understand their motives. The analyst suggested that the caller might be someone with a personal vendetta or someone who had been closely involved in my life in the past. The investigation continued, but progress was slow. The police could only do so much with the limited information available. The calls eventually stopped, but the fear and paranoia lingered. I had taken measures to protect myself and my privacy, but the experience had left a deep scar. As time went on, I began to rebuild my sense of security. I took steps to better safeguard my personal information and became more cautious about who I let into my life. The experience had taught me valuable lessons about privacy, trust, and the importance of vigilance. Even though the calls had ceased, I was left with a lingering sense of unease. I often wondered about the identity of the person behind the threats and their motives. The uncertainty and the feeling of being constantly watched had a lasting impact on my psyche. Eventually, I learned to live with the fear, making it a part of my life but not letting it control me. I focused on rebuilding my sense of normalcy and finding peace amidst the lingering shadows of the past. The ordeal had been a harsh reminder of how easily one's life could be upended by unseen forces, but it also reinforced my resilience and capacity to endure. The anonymous calls had tested my limits, but they also taught me the importance of seeking help, documenting threats, and not allowing fear to dominate my life. Though the memory of those calls would always be a part of my story, I had emerged from the experience stronger, more aware, and more determined to protect my own well-being. Story 39. The realization that my house keys had been copied and that someone had been entering my home without my knowledge was a nightmare that unfolded slowly, almost imperceptibly. It began with small, unsettling incidents that seemed out of place but were easily dismissed. Over time, these incidents coalesced into a pattern that revealed a deeply disturbing breach of my personal security. The first indication that something was wrong came on a chilly autumn evening. I had been working late and arrived home to find that my front door was slightly ajar. It was peculiar, as I was certain I had locked it before leaving. I chalked it up to a lapse in memory, or perhaps a malfunctioning lock, and quickly pushed the door shut and locked it securely. I made a mental note to have the lock checked but didn't think much more of it. The following week, however, I started noticing other signs that something was amiss. Items in my home seemed to be out of place. A picture frame on the mantel was slightly askew, and a book one distinctly remembered placing on the coffee table was now on the bookshelf. I began to feel uneasy but dismissed these occurrences as mere forgetfulness or the result of an overactive imagination. It wasn't until a particularly cold evening in December that the unsettling nature of the situation became clear. I had returned home to find that my living room window, which I always kept locked, was wide open. The chill in the air was noticeable, and I could see my curtains swaying gently. Panic surged through me as I rushed inside to check if anything had been stolen or tampered with. To my relief, nothing appeared to be missing, but the sense of violation was palpable. Determined to get to the bottom of these occurrences, I took several precautionary steps. I changed the locks on my doors, hoping to eliminate any possibility of someone having a duplicate key. I also installed a security camera system around my home, including a few hidden cameras inside. The idea was to monitor the property and detect any unusual activity, though I hoped it wouldn't come to that. Days passed without incident, and I began to relax a bit. The new locks and security cameras gave me a sense of reassurance, and the fear that had once plagued me seemed to recede. However, just as I was beginning to feel more secure, a new, disturbing pattern emerged. One evening, I received a notification from my security system app. The alert showed footage from one of the hidden cameras in my living room. I hesitated before watching, unsure of what I might find. The video footage revealed a person entering my home through the front door, which was unlocked. The figure moved about my living room, appearing to search through drawers and cabinets. My heart raced as I watched the footage, seeing the intruder rummage through my belongings with a casual air, as if it were a common occurrence. I reviewed the footage multiple times, trying to identify the intruder or understand how they had gained access. The person wore a nondescript outfit with a hat pulled low over their face, making identification difficult. I could not recognize them, nor could I determine how they had obtained a copy of my key. The video showed them leaving after about 20 minutes, closing the door behind them but leaving it unlocked. The discovery of the footage was a devastating blow. It confirmed my worst fears: someone had indeed been entering my home while I was away. I immediately contacted the authorities and provided them with the video footage and all the details I had gathered. The police took the matter seriously, but the lack of identifiable features in the footage made it challenging for them to pursue leads effectively. In the meantime, I took additional measures to secure my home. I upgraded my security system with motion detectors and placed more cameras in strategic locations. I also reached out to a locksmith to have all my locks replaced and installed a new deadbolt on my front door. The sense of vulnerability was overwhelming, and I wanted to ensure that every possible precaution was taken. Despite these efforts, the psychological toll was significant. I felt a constant sense of being watched and began to second-guess every decision I made. The fear of someone entering my home while I was away or even while I was asleep was paralyzing. I found myself avoiding leaving the house for extended periods and became hyper-vigilant about securing every window and door. As time went on, the police investigation continued, but progress was slow. The authorities were able to enhance the video footage slightly, but it did not yield any new leads. They encouraged me to be patient and assured me that they were doing everything possible to resolve the case. I also took to sharing my experience with neighbors and local community groups, hoping that someone might have seen something or could offer additional insights. One day, I received a call from the police with an update. They had identified a potential suspect based on similar cases in the area. The individual had a history of property-related offenses, and their pattern of behavior matched the incidents that had occurred at my home. The suspect was apprehended, and the police discovered that they had been using a duplicate key to gain access to various properties, including mine. The arrest brought a sense of relief, but the emotional impact of the breach lingered. The experience had left me with a heightened awareness of the importance of home security and personal safety. I continued to monitor my security system vigilantly and made sure to remain proactive about safeguarding my home. In the end, while the resolution of the case provided closure, the experience served as a stark reminder of the vulnerabilities we face in our daily lives. It highlighted the importance of remaining vigilant and taking proactive steps to protect oneself and one's home from potential threats. The breach of security had been a deeply unsettling experience, but it ultimately reinforced the need for resilience and preparedness in the face of adversity. Story 40. The hotel had been a welcome retreat after weeks of stressful work. I had chosen it for its blend of comfort and convenience, its reviews promising a pleasant stay. The lobby was elegant, the staff friendly, and my room was well appointed, complete with a spacious bathroom. I was looking forward to unwinding in the peace of this temporary sanctuary. The first few days of my stay were uneventful. I went about my usual routine, working from the hotel room during the day, exploring the city in the evenings, and enjoying the occasional meal in the hotel's restaurant. Everything seemed perfect, and I felt a sense of relief wash over me each time I returned to the room. One evening, after a particularly long day, I decided to take a long, relaxing bath. I drew a hot bath, added some scented bubbles, and settled in, savoring the warmth and comfort. The bathroom was well lit, with plush towels and a clean, modern design. As I relaxed, I noticed a small, unusual object on the bathroom counter that I hadn't seen before. It was a tiny, black dot nestled between the soap dish and a bottle of shampoo. At first, I thought it was some kind of decorative piece or a part of the bathroom's design. However, as I looked closer, I realized it wasn't a part of the decor at all. It was a small lens, subtly embedded in the corner of the room. My heart raced as I recognized it for what it was: a hidden camera. Panic set in as I scrambled out of the bath, wrapping myself in a towel. I examined the camera more closely, trying to determine if it was active. It was mounted in a discreet corner of the bathroom, almost invisible unless you were specifically looking for it. I felt a surge of violation and disgust. The realization that someone had been secretly recording me in such an intimate setting was deeply unsettling. I knew I had to act quickly. My first instinct was to call the hotel's front desk, but my mind raced with questions. Had anyone else been recorded? How long had this been happening? I felt exposed and vulnerable, and I couldn't shake the feeling that my privacy had been egregiously breached. Taking a deep breath, I decided to approach the situation methodically. I carefully removed the camera from its position and inspected it. It appeared to be a small, battery-operated device with a built-in memory card. I took several pictures of it with my phone, documenting its location and appearance. I then wrapped the camera in a towel and made my way to the front desk. The hotel staff were initially baffled by my claim, but the evidence was undeniable. They examined the camera and quickly realized the gravity of the situation. The manager, clearly distressed, assured me that they would address the issue immediately and contacted the local authorities. While waiting for the police to arrive, I felt a mix of anger and dread. I couldn't help but replay the events in my mind, wondering how many other guests might have been victims of this invasion of privacy. The hotel manager was apologetic and promised that they would cooperate fully with the investigation. They offered to relocate me to another room and provide a complimentary stay, but the offer felt hollow in the face of such a serious breach. When the authorities arrived, they took possession of the camera and began their investigation. They questioned me about my stay, the times I had used the bathroom, and whether I had noticed anything unusual. I provided them with all the information I had, including the evidence I had collected. The investigation revealed that the hidden camera was part of a more extensive surveillance setup that had been discreetly installed in several rooms of the hotel. The discovery was shocking. The police found additional cameras and recording devices in other rooms, all linked to a central storage unit. It became apparent that someone with access to the hotel's security system had orchestrated this elaborate scheme. The hotel management cooperated fully with the investigation, but the damage had been done. The staff were shocked and distressed, and the hotel's reputation was severely impacted. The authorities traced the cameras back to a former employee who had used their knowledge of the hotel's layout and security system to install and operate the devices. This individual had been using the footage to satisfy voyeuristic tendencies, exploiting their position of trust for personal gratification. As the investigation unfolded, it became clear that I was not the only victim. The police identified several other guests who had been unknowingly recorded, and the evidence was used to press charges against the perpetrator. The legal proceedings were ongoing, but the emotional impact of the invasion lingered. In the aftermath of the ordeal, I struggled to come to terms with what had happened. The sense of violation was profound, and it took time to process the breach of my personal space. I was offered counseling and support from the hotel and local authorities, and while the experience had left me shaken, I found comfort in the knowledge that justice was being pursued. The incident prompted the hotel to implement stricter security measures and to undergo a comprehensive review of their surveillance and privacy policies. They worked to restore their reputation and ensure that such a breach would not happen again. For me, the experience served as a stark reminder of the vulnerabilities we face in our private lives. The invasion of my personal space had been a shocking breach of trust, and it took time to rebuild my sense of security. The ordeal underscored the importance of vigilance and the need to protect our privacy in an increasingly interconnected world. While the immediate threat was addressed, the psychological impact of the hidden camera remained. It was a sobering lesson in the complexities of privacy and trust, and a reminder of the need to remain aware of our surroundings, even in places that are supposed to offer sanctuary. Story 41. It began with small, disconcerting incidents that seemed too coincidental to ignore. At first, it was nothing more than receiving an unexpected package from an online store I didn't remember ordering from. The package contained a set of high-end headphones, but I shrugged it off as a promotional gift or a mix-up. Soon after, I noticed that my credit card statement included charges for subscriptions and services I had no knowledge of. I chalked these up to errors or perhaps a misunderstanding. The real alarm bells went off when I received a call from my bank one afternoon. They were concerned about unusual activity on my account. According to them, someone had been attempting to access my funds and make significant withdrawals. I assured them that I had not initiated any such transactions and that my account was secure. They advised me to monitor my account closely and report any further irregularities. I began to pay more attention to my personal accounts and noticed an alarming pattern. My email was inundated with password reset requests for various accounts. I hadn't requested these resets, and it seemed that someone was trying to gain unauthorized access to my online profiles. I found myself locked out of several of my accounts with unfamiliar activity suggesting that someone was already inside. The breaking point came when I received a notification from a social media platform I rarely used, informing me of a successful login from an unfamiliar device. Panic set in as I realized that my personal information and social media accounts had been compromised. I tried to log in and found that my password had been changed, along with the associated recovery options. Desperate for answers, I began to investigate. I reached out to customer service for the various platforms and financial institutions involved, but the process of regaining control of my accounts was slow and cumbersome. Each organization required extensive verification and documentation, adding to the stress of the situation. I decided to conduct my own investigation into the anomalies. I started by reviewing my recent activities and communications, looking for any clues that might indicate how my identity had been stolen. The more I delved into it, the more I began to uncover odd coincidences and troubling patterns. I noticed that the fraudulent transactions and account changes often occurred at times when I was away from home, suggesting that someone had been tracking my movements. One evening, I sat down to review my online presence, searching for any discrepancies or signs of unauthorized access. I discovered that my personal information, including my name, address, and even my social security number, had been used to create new accounts and services under my name. It became evident that someone had not only gained access to my existing accounts, but had also been impersonating me to establish new ones. I contacted the authorities to report the identity theft. The detective was assigned to my case, and together we began to piece together the puzzle. The detective explained that identity theft often involves sophisticated schemes where perpetrators would gather personal information through various means, including phishing, data breaches, and even physical theft. The investigation revealed that my personal information had likely been obtained through a combination of methods. There had been a data breach at a company where I had previously done business, and it was possible that my details had been compromised during that incident. Additionally, the detective uncovered evidence that suggested the impersonator had used social engineering tactics to gain access to my accounts. As the weeks went by, I worked tirelessly to recover control of my accounts and address the fallout of the identity theft. I collaborated with financial institutions to reverse fraudulent transactions and restore my credit. I also took steps to strengthen my online security by changing passwords, enabling two-factor authentication, and monitoring my credit reports for any further suspicious activity. The process of reclaiming my identity was exhausting and fraught with challenges. There were numerous calls, forms to fill out, and documentation to provide. Each step felt like an uphill battle, but I remained determined to regain control and ensure that my personal information was secure. The identity theft case eventually led to some progress, with the authorities managing to trace some of the fraudulent activities back to a network of individuals involved in similar schemes. While they were able to make arrests and prevent further misuse of my identity, the experience left me deeply shaken and cautious. The incident taught me valuable lessons about the importance of safeguarding personal information and the need to remain vigilant in the digital age. I became more aware of the potential threats and took proactive measures to protect my privacy. Despite the resolution of the case, the experience had a lasting impact on my sense of security. I was more cautious about sharing personal information and became acutely aware of the potential for identity theft and fraud. The series of coincidences that led to the discovery of the impersonation had served as a harsh reminder of the vulnerabilities in our interconnected world and the importance of taking proactive steps to protect oneself from such threats. In the end, while the process of recovering from identity theft was arduous, it reinforced the need for vigilance and the importance of taking control of one's own security. The experience became a sobering reminder of the fragility of personal privacy and the lengths to which individuals might go to exploit it. Story 42. The morning started like any other. I brewed my coffee, checked my emails, and glanced through the usual daily news. Everything felt routine until I opened the door to find a small, unremarkable package waiting on the doorstep. It was a plain, brown cardboard box with no labels or markings, seemingly innocuous. I picked it up and carried it inside, thinking it might be a misplaced delivery, or perhaps something I had forgotten I ordered. I placed the box on the kitchen counter and, with a mix of curiosity and nonchalance, began to open it. Inside, I discovered a stack of photographs, each one meticulously arranged. My initial excitement at receiving what I thought might be a personal surprise quickly turned to unease as I began to sift through the photo. The images were of me and my family, taken from various angles and settings that I knew were not public. There were pictures of my children playing in the backyard, a candid shot of my wife and me on a walk, and even some from inside our home, taken in rooms that were clearly private. Each photo seemed to be capturing moments that were meant to be private and cherished. I could feel my heart rate increase as I scanned through the stack, each image more unsettling than the last. The photos weren't just of us at home, they also included images of us at family gatherings, vacations, and even mundane daily routines. Some were clearly taken through windows or from afar, suggesting that whoever took them had been watching us for some time. I could not recall any moments when we had felt watched or noticed anything unusual, which made the discovery even more disturbing. I picked up the phone and called my wife at work, my voice trembling as I explained what I had found. She was understandably alarmed and suggested that we contact the local authorities immediately. I agreed, feeling a growing sense of violation and fear. The police arrived within the hour, and I handed over the package and photographs. They carefully examined each photo and began asking questions about any suspicious activities or individuals we might have encountered recently. The officers assured me that they would start an investigation, but warned me that finding the culprit might take time. They advised me to document any further unusual occurrences and to be vigilant about our home security. As they left, I felt a sense of helplessness. The privacy and safety of my family had been breached in a way that was deeply unsettling. That evening, as I sat in the living room with my family, I could see the anxiety in their faces. We discussed the situation and decided to take additional security measures. We installed motion-activated lights around the house, set up a security camera system, and made sure all windows and doors were locked and reinforced. Despite these precautions, the feeling of unease lingered, and the sense of violation was hard to shake. The next few days were a blur of fear and uncertainty. We continued to receive sporadic calls and messages from friends and neighbors expressing their concern and offering support. The police contacted us periodically for updates and to ask additional questions, but the investigation seemed to be moving slowly. The photographs were a crucial piece of evidence, but they had yet to provide any leads. During this time, I found myself obsessing over every detail of our daily lives. I scrutinized every passerby and became hyper-aware of any unusual activity in the neighborhood. My once peaceful routine had been disrupted by the constant fear that someone was still watching us. The intrusion into our lives had left us feeling exposed and vulnerable. As the weeks went by, we began to regain some semblance of normalcy. The security measures we had taken provided a degree of comfort, and we started to feel slightly more secure. The police continued their investigation, and although we had no new developments, the support from our community helped alleviate some of the stress. One day, several months after the initial incident, we received a call from the police. They had managed to trace some leads related to the photographs. It turned out that the perpetrator was a former neighbor who had been using a hidden camera system to monitor not only our home but several other houses in the neighborhood. The individual had been caught and was facing charges related to invasion of privacy and stalking. The news provided a sense of relief, but it also brought a flood of emotions. The feeling of violation was still fresh, and knowing that someone had been spying on us for so long was deeply troubling. However, the resolution of the case offered a sense of closure, and we were able to begin the process of healing and moving forward. The experience had a profound impact on my family and me. We became more vigilant about our privacy and more proactive in protecting our personal space. We also became advocates for increased awareness about home security and the importance of safeguarding one's personal information. The ordeal was a harsh reminder of how vulnerable we can be in an increasingly connected world. In the end, the incident served as a sobering lesson about the need for vigilance and the importance of taking steps to protect oneself and one's family from unwanted intrusions. While the violation of our privacy was deeply unsettling, the experience ultimately strengthened our resolve to safeguard our personal space and advocate for greater awareness and protection against such invasions. Story 43. It started with a series of seemingly innocent misunderstandings. At first, I thought they were just minor hiccups in communication, slightly off messages or confusing texts. But when a pattern began to emerge, I realized something was seriously wrong. It all began one weekend when I noticed that my mother had been unusually distant. We'd always had a close relationship, so it was troubling to sense a shift. When I reached out to her to ask if everything was okay, she seemed evasive. Her responses were curt, and she mentioned something about a misunderstanding without elaborating. The next day, my best friend, Sarah, confronted me with a similar issue. She seemed hurt and confused about something I had supposedly said in an email, though I had no memory of sending any such message. Her frustration was palpable, and despite my attempts to clarify, the rift between us widened. The final straw came when my partner, Alex, brought up a series of grievances based on a string of emails that I had no recollection of sending. He was visibly upset, accusing me of being inconsiderate and distant. I was bewildered and hurt, trying desperately to understand how our communication had deteriorated so quickly. The consistent theme was the same emails that I had supposedly sent but didn't remember writing. The content of these messages often portrayed me in a negative light, causing conflicts and misunderstandings with those closest to me. The realization that something was amiss began to sink in, and I started to piece together a chilling possibility my personal emails might have been intercepted and manipulated. I immediately took action. I began by examining my email account for any signs of unauthorized access. I checked my sent folder, my drafts, and my trash, trying to find any discrepancies or unfamiliar messages. Everything seemed to be in order, but the problems persisted, indicating that someone might have been tampering with my communications. To investigate further, I contacted my email provider support team. I explained the situation and requested an audit of my account activity. They confirmed that there had been some unusual login attempts from unfamiliar locations. They also found traces of email forwarding rules that I hadn't set up. It became clear that my account had been compromised, and my emails were being intercepted and altered. With this information, I decided to take additional steps to protect my digital life. I updated my passwords across all my accounts, set up two-factor authentication, and reviewed my security settings. I also worked with the support team to remove any unauthorized forwarding rules and to secure my email account. In parallel, I tried to address the strained relationships caused by the manipulated emails. I reached out to my mother, Sarah, and Alex individually to explain what had happened. I showed them the evidence of the email tampering and apologized for any misunderstandings that had arisen from the altered messages. It was a difficult process trying to rebuild trust and repair the damage caused by the intrusions. The aftermath of the breach was emotionally taxing. Rebuilding the trust of my loved ones took time and effort. I had to prove that the conflicts and misunderstandings were not of my making, but rather the result of someone's malicious actions. My relationships gradually began to heal, but the process was slow and fraught with challenges. As part of my recovery, I sought professional advice on digital security and privacy. I learned about the various ways in which personal information can be compromised and the best practices for protecting oneself from such attacks. The experience also prompted me to be more cautious about my online presence and to regularly review the security of my accounts. Despite the improvements in my digital security, the psychological impact of the breach lingered. I found myself constantly second-guessing my communications and being more hesitant in my interactions. The fear of being manipulated again made me more guarded and less open in my personal and professional relationships. In addition to securing my digital life, I also took steps to enhance my overall well-being. I engaged in activities that helped me manage stress and anxiety, such as exercise and mindfulness practices. I also sought support from a counselor to process the emotional toll of the experience and to rebuild my sense of trust and security. The incident served as a stark reminder of the vulnerabilities inherent in our digital lives. It underscored the importance of vigilance and proactive measures in protecting personal information. Although the breach had been resolved and my relationships began to recover, the experience left an indelible mark on my approach to digital communication and personal security. Over time, I was able to regain a sense of normalcy and confidence in my interactions. The support of my loved ones and the lessons learned from the breach helped me navigate the challenges and rebuild my life. The journey from betrayal and confusion to recovery and resilience was arduous, but it ultimately strengthened my resolve to protect my privacy and to advocate for greater awareness about digital security. Story 44. The first envelope arrived on a quiet Wednesday afternoon, slipping into my mailbox amidst a pile of routine correspondence. It was plain and unmarked, save for my name scrawled in a tidy, unfamiliar handwriting. I brought it inside, curious but not overly concerned, expecting perhaps an invitation or a marketing flyer. Instead, what I found inside left me unsettled and confused. The letter detailed a dinner party I had hosted 2 weekends prior. It described the evening with startling precision: the menu, the guests, the conversations that took place. It even included snippets of personal anecdotes and private jokes that were shared among friends. The final line of the letter read, "It seems your guests had quite the enjoyable evening. Hope it was memorable for you too." I was taken aback. The accuracy of the details was disconcerting. but I initially dismissed it as an elaborate prank or perhaps an attempt at some sort of social experiment. I told myself that it was probably someone who had overheard or read about the event in a social media post and decided to take it too far. The second letter arrived just a week later, and it was even more unnerving. This time it contained detailed information about my daily routines. It described my morning habits, from the time I woke up to the route I took on my morning jog. It noted the exact times I usually left for work, the coffee shop I frequented, and the grocery store I visited on weekends. The letter concluded with a cryptic remark: "Your routine seems quite well structured. It must be comforting to have such predictability." I began to feel a growing sense of unease. The specificity of the information suggested that someone was keeping close tabs on my life. I checked my home for any signs of tampering or surveillance equipment, but everything appeared to be in order. My phone and computer also seemed unaffected by any unusual activity. Despite my attempts to remain calm, the letters kept coming. Each new letter seemed to delve deeper into my personal life. One described an argument I had with a colleague at work, including details about the content of the conversation and the tone of the disagreement. Another letter noted the time I had visited a specific doctor's appointment and even mentioned a discussion I had with the medical staff about my health. My anxiety mounted with each passing letter. I felt increasingly paranoid, wondering if I was being followed or if someone had managed to gain access to my personal information through more invasive means. I decided to take action, hoping to find some answers and regain control over my life. I started by contacting the local police and providing them with the letters. The officer who responded was attentive and took the matter seriously, but the nature of the case posed challenges. The letters were meticulously crafted but offered no concrete clues about the sender. The police advised me to remain vigilant and to keep documenting any suspicious activity. I took their advice and began to vary my routine. I changed my jogging route, started using different coffee shops, and avoided discussing personal matters in public. I also installed additional security measures at home, including motion sensors and security cameras. Despite these precautions, the letters continued to arrive. The private investigator I hired, Laura, was equally concerned about the situation. She conducted her own investigation, reviewing the letters and analyzing any potential sources of the information. Laura interviewed my neighbors, my colleagues, and anyone who might have had access to my personal life. She also examined my digital devices for any signs of compromise. As Laura's investigation progressed, she uncovered a pattern in the letters. The information seemed to be collected over time, suggesting that the sender had been monitoring me for an extended period. The level of detail and the timing of the letters pointed to someone who had a significant amount of insight into my life. Laura's breakthrough came when she traced the source of the letters to a former acquaintance of mine. This individual had previously worked in a job that required a high level of access to personal information and had a history of invasive behavior. The investigation revealed that they had been using their knowledge and resources to track me, driven by a sense of resentment and a desire for control. The authorities apprehended the individual, and their motives were revealed to be rooted in personal grievances and a twisted sense of entitlement. The case brought to light the disturbing extent to which someone could use their access and knowledge for malicious purposes. Throughout the ordeal, I struggled with feelings of violation and paranoia. The experience had shattered my sense of security and left me wary of my surroundings. However, the resolution of the case provided a measure of relief. The individual who had been monitoring me was held accountable for their actions, and the letters ceased. In the aftermath, I took steps to rebuild my sense of security and privacy. I continued to work with Laura to enhance my personal security measures and remained vigilant about my digital and physical surroundings. The experience taught me the importance of being proactive in protecting one's personal information and the need to trust one's instincts when something feels off. While the ordeal was deeply unsettling, it also reinforced the value of resilience and the importance of seeking help when faced with such invasions. The letters had been a stark reminder of how easily one's privacy can be compromised and how crucial it is to take action to safeguard oneself from such threats. Story 45. It was an unusually warm autumn afternoon when I first noticed the car. The sun was dipping low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the neighborhood. I was out in my front yard, tidying up the garden and enjoying the crisp, fresh air when I saw the old vehicle parked across the street, partially obscured by a cluster of overgrown bushes. At first glance, the car seemed unremarkable, a faded, rusty sedan with a few dings and scratches. Its once bright paint had faded to a dull, lifeless color, and the tires were worn down. It had clearly been sitting there for some time. I assumed it was an abandoned vehicle, but something about it made me uneasy. Perhaps it was the way it seemed out of place, an anomaly in an otherwise well-maintained neighborhood. The car remained there for days, and as the week went on, my curiosity grew. It was parked in the same spot, untouched and seemingly forgotten. I noticed that it had no license plates, and that the windows were slightly fogged over, making it hard to see inside. As I continued with my daily routines, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. One afternoon, while doing some yard work, I decided to take a closer look at the car. I approached it cautiously, peering through the fogged windows. The interior was cluttered with personal items, empty coffee cups, crumpled fast food wrappers, and old newspapers. It was clear that someone had been using the car as a temporary shelter or storage space. I opened the driver's side door, which creaked on its hinges, and stepped inside. The smell of stale air and mold greeted me. As I looked around, I noticed a worn-out backpack on the passenger seat. Curiosity getting the better of me, I opened it and found a collection of personal belongings, an old wallet, a few clothes, and a small, leather-bound journal. I hesitated before picking up the journal. It was thin and weathered, with a cracked leather cover that suggested it had seen better days. I opened it cautiously, and what I found inside made my heart skip a beat. The pages were filled with handwritten entries that detailed daily routines and observations. At first, the entries seemed innocuous, describing mundane activities like grocery shopping and errands. But as I continued reading, I realized that the journal contained detailed accounts of my own daily life. The entries were meticulous, noting the times I left for work, the routes I took, and even the times I came home. There were descriptions of my interactions with neighbors and details about my family's routines. It was clear that someone had been observing me closely and recording every detail. The journal included notes about the movements of my family members and observations about our habits. My mind raced as I processed what I was reading. The idea that someone had been monitoring my daily routines and documenting them in such detail was deeply unsettling. I felt a growing sense of anxiety and violation. It was as if the boundaries of my privacy had been shattered, leaving me exposed and vulnerable. I knew I needed to take action. I closed the journal and carefully placed it back in the backpack. I decided to call the authorities, explaining the situation and providing them with the details of what I had found. The police arrived shortly after and conducted a thorough examination of the vehicle. They took note of the personal items in the journal, documenting everything for their investigation. The officers were professional and sympathetic, but they also expressed concern about the potential implications of the discovery. They advised me to be vigilant and to take additional precautions to ensure the safety of my home and family. They also began their investigation by checking for any leads related to the abandoned vehicle and its contents. In the meantime, I took steps to enhance the security around my property. I installed additional outdoor lighting, increased the frequency of my neighborhood watch, and reviewed my home security system to ensure there were no vulnerabilities. I also spoke with my neighbors, alerting them to the situation and advising them to be cautious. The weeks that followed were filled with anxiety and unease. The police investigation made slow progress, and despite their efforts, there were no immediate leads on who might have been responsible for the journal and the abandoned car. The unsettling discovery had left a lingering sense of discomfort, and the car remained a constant reminder of the breach of privacy. As time went on, I tried to return to a sense of normalcy, but the experience had fundamentally changed my perception of safety. I remained vigilant and continued to take precautions, ensuring that my home was secure and that my family was protected. The discovery of the journal had been a harsh reminder of the potential threats that can lurk in the most unexpected places. In the end, the incident underscored the importance of maintaining vigilance and taking proactive measures to safeguard one's privacy and security. While the immediate threat had been addressed, the emotional impact of the breach served as a constant reminder of the need to be ever aware of the potential risks that come with modern life. The abandoned car and the journal had exposed a hidden and unsettling reality, one that would stay with me long after the investigation had concluded.